motion standing in the name of my honourable and right honourable friends. Mr Deputy Speaker, we've called this debate to provide the House with the right that it should have to make the decision on whether fracking should be allowed to restart across our country. The Business Secretary made clear last week that he will not give the House a binding vote on the principle of the fracking ban, despite them overturning their manifesto promise to keep the ban in place, despite the concern on all sides of this House, despite the concerns of the public. If our motion is passed, it will mean that on the 29th of November, the House would debate a fracking bill in 6 weeks' time. We have done this today because we know what would have happened if we had had a simple motion on fracking in the opposition day. The government would simply have abstained and ignored the vote, as they have in votes on the windfall tax, fire and rehire, the cut to universal credit, and no doubt they will try and do so with the motion that was just passed. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is about faith in politics. The government is seeking to break its manifesto promise without even getting the consent of this House. Today, we give all members a chance to make this crucial decision on fracking. Now let me go through the substantive arguments against fracking. There are 4 key questions for the House and the country. Will it make a difference to the price of energy? The answer is no. Is there categorical evidence that it is safe? The answer is no. Is it consistent with any remotely serious response to the climate crisis? The answer is no. And crucially, do people want it? The answer is no. I will give way.
Would he also accept there's another question to be asked? Namely, since we require to have gas to at least 2050, £1 trillion worth of gas to be imported, well, a vital question is, where are we going to get that gas from?
Speaker, I do say to him, we can have a debate about North Sea oil and gas, for example. Fracking is in a wholly different category. It is dangerous, it is expensive, and it is not supported by the public. Now, first, price. Let me just make a bit more I will give way, yeah.
The honourable gentleman. He knows that I, like many of my colleagues, are not in favour of fracking and would like us to maintain a manifesto commitment. But he also knows that by playing party political games this afternoon, there is no way that we could vote for his motion. Is he more interested in genuinely opposing fracking, or is he actually more interested in playing party political games and trying to score points on this really important issue of great importance to our constituents?
Well, I'm glad we've got a member on the opposite side who wants to uphold their manifesto. It's a refreshing change, I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker. But here's the thing, he should be directing his point to the right honourable gentleman, the Secretary of State. He was explicitly asked on the radio last week, will he give the House a binding vote on this issue? And I think the case for it is massively strengthened by the fact that the party opposite is breaking its manifesto promise. He said no. And we are forcing this debate because it is the only way we can give the House a binding vote on this issue. I will in a moment, but let me make some progress. I want to talk about price first of all. I know he's not exactly flavour of the month, but the recently departed Chancellor of the Exchequer said this in February. Even if we lifted the fracking moratorium tomorrow, no amount of shale gas from hundreds of wells dotted across rural England would be enough to lower the European price. Private companies are not going to sell the shale gas they produce to UK consumers below the market price. They are not charities, after all. The Climate Change Committee, Mr Deputy Speaker, says the same. Even the founder of Quadrilla, Chris Cornelius, says even if the UK were to generate significant gas, we are not likely to see lower gas prices, any more than living next to a farm would mean paying less for milk. And the reason, I will in a moment, and the reason is that prices are set in the European market. And the best evidence from the British Geological Survey says that fracking can meet less than 1% of European gas demand. And even that, I will in a moment, and even that in a number of years' time. Hence, it will make no difference to price. No amount of hand-waving from the Secretary of State will change that fact. I give way to the honourable lady.
Right honourable gentleman giving way. Is it not true that he said at the Labour Party conference on the 24th of September 2013 that of course there could be a role for fracking if it can meet safety concerns?
Well, I'm very glad she's done her research about what I said on the 24th of September 2013, because so have I. This is what This is what I think she should listen. This is what I said. I believe when George Osborne says fracking is a panacea, he is totally misguided. The notion it can solve Britain's energy problems is just nonsense. And I went on to say it needed to meet safety concerns and the needs of local residents. Since then, Since then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's been shown it cannot meet safety concerns and it cannot meet the needs of local residents. Second, I want to come to the question of whether it is safe, because. Second, I want to come to the question of safety, because that has been the long-standing debate, a debate which we led in 2013, about fracking. Now, the Conservative manifesto said, we will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically it can be done safely. It is very important to go back to what happened in 2019 and why the government introduced a moratorium. The then Business Secretary, the member for South Northamptonshire, hardly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a tofu-eating woke lefty, said this: it is clear we cannot rule out future unacceptable impacts on the local community. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's not surprising she concluded that. I wonder if the right honourable gentleman has read the official report from the Time. I have, because I'm a nerd, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and they said they could not rule out an event of 4.5 on the Richter scale, having already seen a 2.9 Richter scale event at Preston New Road. I want to tell the House what the impact of such an event would be by reading from the report. Such a scenario would, and I quote, be widely felt. There could be widespread building damage in the study area, with cracked plasterwork affecting approximately 10% of buildings, more serious structural damage of varying degrees affecting 5.4% of buildings, including chimney failure. Some damage will be caused to buildings outside of the study area. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is why the government banned fracking and why they said they would not restart it unless the British Geological Survey said it was safe. In the words of the then Business Secretary, in April of this year, unless the latest scientific evidence demonstrates that shale gas extraction is safe, sustainable, and of minimal disturbance to those living and working nearby, the pause in England will remain in place. No ifs, no buts. And I just want to make the progress on this point. And in their report published last month, the Geological Survey said they could not provide that assurance. Instead, they said hydraulic fracturing can trigger earthquakes large enough to cause structural damage. These events were not predicted in advance of operations. So here is the key point for the whole House. There certainly is not the compelling evidence about safety that the government promised would be the basis of any lifting of the ban. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is as clear an example of a broken manifesto promise as you're ever likely to see. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and he's making a compelling case against fracking, with which I fully agree. Would he also agree with me that for all of those potential downsides which he's referenced, there is absolutely no guarantee that any shale gas extracted would be sold in the national domestic market? It would go to the highest bidder. There could be real downsides for our communities with no obvious uplift in supply.
The gentleman puts it incredibly well. That is why this is such a nonsense idea that the government is coming up with. And so the government is not just breaking a manifesto promise, because no doubt they're going to say, yes, the manifesto was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but a promise made in April of this year by government ministers. And his response, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is not to abide by the promise, but to seek to shift the goalposts. In his immortal words, which I hope MPs will take back to their constituencies, tolerating a higher degree of risk and disturbance appears to be in the national interest. I think that could be a description of the government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is a matter of trust. How can communities across this country trust a government which says one categorical thing in its manifesto, repeats it in April, and then goes back on its word with no mandate from the British people? I have such a sort of fantastic choice. I think my honourable friends have been trying to get in.
For giving way. He talked about the government putting the ban on because of the risk of disturbance to local communities. There was a proposal to frack in Marsh Lane, which happens to be in the neighbouring constituency of North East Derbyshire, and I think the honourable member there is now the planning minister, perhaps dealing with fracking. The reality is there were going to be dozens, if not hundreds, of lorry movements a day down rural lanes. this is what the disturbance could be, and lots of wells drilled, which were going to despoil the local environment. Isn't this the reality of fracking, which every member there opposite ought to think about if they were prepared to accept in their local communities?
I think my honourable friend puts it incredibly well, and I do agree with him. So fracking will... Yes, I will give way.
He's very kind. I'm grateful. In terms of trust, he will know that the government set up this new consultation to determine what public consent is. Would you agree with me that it is a monstrous waste of time and money to try to determine something that doesn't exist? There is no local consent for this. The government itself, plenty of them don't actually want it. If he really wants to know what consent is, why doesn't he have a general election?
The honourable lady makes a point very well, and she anticipates the issue I'm going to come on to shortly. So fracking will not make a difference to bills, Mr Deputy Speaker. We cannot be assured of its safety, and is a disastrous response to the climate crisis. The decision, I won't give way for the moment. The decision on fracking is particularly environmentally damaging, with emissions from fracking up to 50% higher than from conventional gas. And here is the point, Mr Deputy Speaker. If every country follows the lead he suggests of extracting every last drop of their fossil fuel reserves, global temperatures to rise to over 3 degrees centigrade, spelling catastrophe for our children and grandchildren. I have to say, this should be patently obvious to anyone, not least the person in charge of fighting against the climate crisis. I won't give way. I want to make some progress because there are many people who want to speak. I want to come on to Mr Deputy Speaker, to the crucial issue of what the public think. I suggest that the Business Secretary looks at the surveys conducted by his own department. 78% of the public support onshore wind, 83% tidal and offshore wind, 87% solar, but just 17% of people support fracking. Now suddenly, in a sign of desperation about how grossly unpopular and unwanted this policy is, they say they want to design a system of local consent. I don't know, I'm not going to give way for the moment. I don't know why he wants further evidence about what communities think. We already have the answer from the public. Fracking is deeply unpopular and communities don't want it. Indeed, Fylde Council, controlled by his party, at the centre of the main UK experiment in fracking, just passed a unanimous motion saying the ban should remain and saying he should honour his manifesto commitment. I will give way, yeah.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. He knows how the planning system works as well as I do. Councils can refuse planning permission. They can support their local communities. But those fracking companies have the ability to appeal that decision to the planning inspectorate. And he knows public opinion is not a material planning consideration for the planning inspectorate. Isn't this just a smoke and mirrors to get these unpopular proposals through the Tory benches when everybody knows the public opinion counts for nothing?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and you know there's more sort of weasel words in relation to this issue of local consent. I think the honourable gentleman has been desperate to get in.
I find myself in strange agreement with many of the arguments being made from the opposition dispatch box. However, will he be clear that the vote that we're having tonight is not on banning fracking, but is on a procedural matter for the House of Commons? And will he square up to the public and be truthful to the public about what it is that we are voting on tonight?
We are voting on our proposal to bring in a bill to ban fracking. And I say to the honourable gentleman, of whom I have a large amount of respect, I do say to him, we are not going to get a vote on the principle of fracking because the Business Secretary has said that in terms. This is his chance. I know he's against fracking. This is his chance to stand up for his constituents and say no to fracking. Now, I want to say something more about the issue of consent and their amendment. And to say something to the House as a whole, to his backbenchers, and it goes to the honourable gentleman. Don't fall for the government's weasel words in this debate. The way to stop fracking is to vote for our motion, and if they do not, their constituents will know they had the chance to stop fracking and refuse to do so. And I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, we now discover this is not all they'll be voting for tonight, because the genius minds of the government whip's office are now seeking to turn a vote on this important issue into a vote of confidence in the current Prime Minister. Mr Deputy Speaker, picture the scene. The government whip's office, confronted with a vote on fracking, one of the least popular causes in the country, the government falling apart around them. They could decide to retreat, but that would be yet another U-turn. They could concede a vote of this House on the fracking ban, but they would lose, and fracking would be dead. And then at the 11th hour, one galaxy brain, says the way to force it through is to make it a vote not just on one of the most unpopular causes in the country, fracking, but the most unpopular cause in the country. The current Prime Minister. You might call it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the frack me or sack me strategy. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in normal times, such an idiotic idea would have been dismissed out of hands. But these are not normal times. They see it as their leaky life raft. But I say to the House, and I say to members opposite, they all know that the Prime Minister will be gone in a matter of weeks, if not days, if not hours. They know fracking will go with her. Why defend the indefensible? Why not be on the right side of history and their constituents? Just like this government, fracking is a dangerous, extreme idea which the British people do not support. And I appeal to all members of the House, particularly members opposite, to today have the courage of their convictions. Today is a day when they can put their constituents before their party and vote to give this House the decision on a fracking ban. It's time to consign fracking to the dustbin of history.
The question is, as on the order paper, and I now call Jacob Rees-Mogg to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the right honourable gentleman for raising this important topic. I recognise that many members and their constituents have concerns about shale gas, and that is why we will consult on the system of local consent and provide clear advice on seismicity and safety before any hydraulic fracturing for shale gas takes place. We are committed. Yes, of course I'll give way.
Sorry to intervene so soon in his speech, and I'm grateful to him. My right honourable friend will be aware of deep concerns in Sussex about fracking. They are concerns that I share, not least because our 2019 manifesto said we will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically it is safe, which I don't think it does. So can my right honourable friend assure me that in the government's consultation paper that he's just referred to on local consent, they will include an option for local referenda arranged by local authorities and overseen by the Electoral Commission?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend has preempted a couple of paragraphs of my speech because I was going to say that the consultation should consider the use of local referendums. I think that is one of the ways in which local consent could be indicated. We want to ensure that the consultation, not at the moment, consultation considers the views of regional mayors and local authorities, as well as the immediate concerns of those most directly affected. And I also want it to consider the views of MPs, as well as I said to my right honourable friend, local referendums. We will consult on the mechanism, but I can assure the House that any process of evidencing local support must be independent rather than directly by the companies themselves. And if evidence of the appropriate local support for any development is insufficient, that development should not proceed. Local communities will have a veto. So I can assure my honourable friend, the member for Rother Valley, that if people in his constituency do not want fracking, they will not have it. Of course I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friends for giving way. Could he just confirm, for clarity's sake, that the moratorium will remain in place whilst his process of consultation is agreed, and it will remain in place until it is approved by a positive vote in this place following a debate and a vote on the floor of the House? And can he also confirm that the government will indeed move its amendment today to a division if time allows and the circumstances are created?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I would like to make it absolutely clear that we need local consent before anything happens. Let me be clear to my honourable friend from Dorset that once the consultation on the mechanism for ascertaining a community's view has been completed, the results will be brought to the House for approval, which I think he was also asking. If the House does not approve, does not approve, fracking could not go ahead. Even if the House were to approve a mechanism, local communities would still have to consent in accordance with the mechanism. So I reiterate, local communities will have a veto, and I give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to the Secretary of State. I want to take him back to the word word unless in our manifesto, in where we said that we won't support fracking unless the science shows categorically it can be done safely. Will the Secretary of State confirm that the sense of that word is that we would need, at the very least, a new rapid evidence review about safety? So would the Secretary of State commit to that for the manifesto on which he and I were elected on?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I think his suggestion is an eminently sensible one, to have a rapid review of the evidence. And how can I not give way to my neighbour from Somerset? I give way.
I thank him for graciously giving way. And aside from the fact that my right honourable friend might want to clarify that actually this is a bit of a game, this debate, it's not exactly about fracking. If we are talking about fracking, to the previous point, scientific evidence and data is so critical. It's everything we base our policies on. And would he agree with me that the data shouldn't just be about seismic activity, but the effect on water will be critical? And I don't just mean the water that's put down the drilling space, is actually the effect on the hydrology in future years. And I think it's really critical as a government that we are seen to be very serious about the scientific evidence on this.
I am grateful to my honourable friend on both counts. First of all, my honourable friend is right to say that trying to take control of the order paper is parliamentary interweaving rather than actually the substance of the debate. And actually, to take control of the order paper, people need to have won a majority in the election. That is how our system works. And I think the experience that we had in 2017 to 2019 proved how bad it is for Parliament when the order paper is messed around with. So I think that part is bad. On her point regarding water, I think my honourable friend is absolutely spot on. It is one of the keys to how things could be done safely, and we have to be certain that water, both the water used on site and water that may be near sites, will be safe. I think my honourable friend from Winchester wanted to intervene, and I would happily give way to him.
That's very kind of the Secretary of State. I'm not concerned about the threat that local consent will go the wrong way in my constituency, because I don't believe for a minute my constituents would give consent to fracking in our area. But just further to an intervention that the Secretary of State had from the other side, well, the Shadow Secretary of State had from his own side, around the planning inspectorate. The Secretary of State says local people will have a veto over this. Can he just be clear, the planning inspectorate will not have a veto over local people?
Yeah. Let me be absolutely clear. Local communities will have a veto. If it does not get local consent, then, and that will be consulted on as to what local consent form must be, but if it, and that could be, as my honourable friend from Sussex asked, it may be by local referendum. That's what the consultation will be about. But if local consent is withheld, that is a veto, and it won't be overruled by national government. I'll give way once again to my...
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State, who, in fairness to him, is trying to address the serious concerns that he knows exist on these benches, and I think many of us are grateful to him for that. What I think I heard him say in response, Mr Deputy Speaker, to my earlier intervention, but I'd just like him to clarify, which is when he brings back this local consent process, tick box, programme, if the House votes against it, the moratorium on fracking, by its very definition, remains in place. Can he just confirm that for absolute clarity? I.e., today is not the end of the matter.
My honourable friend is right, today is not the end of the matter, and that if the House were not to accept the local consent mechanism, then there would not be an ability for local communities to give consent, and that would mean the veto were in place. I see my right honourable friend from East Yorkshire wishes to intervene.
To my right honourable friend for giving way, he's being very generous. Isn't the neatest way of assessing local consent to take away the right of appeal to a planning inspector in these matters? And so the decision of the local planning authority is to be deemed the expression of local consent and is the final decision.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. That's absolutely the purpose of the consultation, to see what form local consent ought to take. I'll give way to my honourable friend from Gloucester.
I'm grateful to him. And it is absolutely true that the motion brought forward by the opposition, of course, does not reflect what's in our manifesto, because it calls on the government to introduce a ban on hydraulic fracking, followed by 3.5 pages of procedural stuff, which is what it's really about. Whereas what our manifesto says is to introduce a moratorium. The question for the Secretary of State, however, is that in his letter to us, he says, with time, we will gain more understanding of how we can best develop this potentially very substantial UK asset. Can I put it to him that the question is, with time, we will gain more understanding of whether we should best develop this potential asset? Does he agree with me? And would he accept that?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. We are not preempting local consent in the letter that I sent out, so he is right. I think the time has come for me to return to my text, at least for a moment or two. I do understand, as we have discussed, the concerns that people have about the safety of hydraulic fracturing. And the excellent report by the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering from 2012 suggests that shale gas extraction can be managed safely and effectively in the United Kingdom, owing to our high regulatory standards and many decades' experience of extracting oil and gas both on and offshore. And I would like to go back to the quotation from the Right Honourable Gentleman from Doncaster North, who said, and it was reported in Wales Online on the 25th of December 2013, of course there could be a role for it if it can meet safety concerns and the needs of local residents. So the Right Honourable Gentleman actually should be voting against his own motion, because he accepted there should be a role for it. Now, the government is absolutely determined to build our energy security. At a time where energy costs are a worry for many, I can say that we are starting from a tolerably good place. The United Kingdom is blessed with a healthy mix of different sources of energy, including a strong wind resource, one of the few significant oil and gas reserves in Europe, several gas import terminals, and a well-managed electricity network. We have also made strong progress in building new renewable electricity generation, like offshore wind, and a plan to accelerate this further, while also developing new nuclear capacity. However, we cannot escape the fact that we are a nation with a structural reliance on gas, even though we will be reducing our reliance on gas on the way to net zero. Indeed, we may be using just a quarter of the gas we now use by 2050. Gas will remain the essential transition fuel. And this may have been out of sight and out of mind for some years. Maybe we were not sufficiently prepared, but we must not take our local gas supplies for granted, because this year the energy world changed. Putin's war against Ukraine and the weaponizing of gas supply to Europe has cut off a major source of supply to the European markets that we are connected to, and has ignited a global rush for gas resources. So while there is no immediate threat to UK supply, we cannot let our domestic production fade away and end up ever more reliant on imports. No responsible government would gamble with the gas supply. This is why, in the near term, our priority is keeping our domestic production online. The North Sea Transition Authority has launched the 33rd oil and gas licensing round, which is expected to deliver over 100 new licences and put more UK gas on the grid. And this is why what we're discussing to make the most of our shale gas resources. Of course, I can go to the Honourable Gentleman.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I always try to be helpful in this place. The way out of this dilemma, if you like, is of course green hydrogen. And I repeat what I said some days ago in this place. There are advanced plans in my constituency, the north of Scotland, to generate 50 megawatts of energy, and shortly they'll go up to 300 megawatts. I again invite Her Majesty's Government to come and see our plans. It will be helpful to all concerned.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman's intervention is indeed helpful. I think green hydrogen is one of the most exciting technologies, and I am very enthusiastic about the opportunities there. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Does the Minister share my bemusement at some of the arguments we made here today, that we know we're going to need gas, we know we're going to spend billions of pounds importing gas from regimes which we can't depend upon, and we know that we have gas in the north of England which could generate thousands of jobs and give us the security of our own supply. What's not to like about that?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman who puts his thoughts with classic cogency. Not at the moment. The Government remains committed to net zero by 2050. It is how we reach it without putting our energy security at risk. The honourable gentleman always wants to intervene on every point, and he always says on this point, so it's hard to believe that it really is on this point. But let me say it makes no sense to become more reliant on shale gas produced overseas. Indeed, the Climate Change Committee's analysis notes that while current evidence on the emission footprint of UK shale gas and liquefied gas is not yet definitive, available estimates indicate that emissions from those imports could be higher than those that would arise from commercial UK shale gas production by between 2 and 63 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of gas consumed. So using our own resources is more environmentally friendly and will help us to get to net zero. And I will give way on that point to my right honourable friend.
Well, he's making some very valid points. Indeed, it's not just about domestic gas supplies and electricity production, it's about the chemical industry, most importantly the fertiliser industry. One of our plants has already shut down. The other plant is now switching from natural gas from UK sources to ammonia brought in from the United States because they have cheap shale gas to enable that industry to keep going. And if we can't produce our own fertiliser, then food production in this country is under great threat.
I am grateful to my right honourable friend who puts it very clearly. It is using our own resources is environmentally friendly, but we have to make sure there is popular consent for it. And I feel that the British public would not welcome the disruption and shortages that would be caused by Labour's policy of taking gas out of the network on 2030. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman on that point.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way and been so generous in giving way to people, particularly on his own side. In my constituency of Weaver Vale, indeed in Ellesmere Port and Neston and Chester, we had a public inquiry only recently, and our communities rejected shale extraction. We rejected that, and it cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. That's local consent. Why do we again have to jump through hoops to go through the same process?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman should be supporting what I'm saying. He shows the value of local consent and the reality of it, that it will not always be given, and I'm very well aware of that. So let me move on to seismic limits, because we have been clear that any future exploration or development of shale gas will need to meet rigorous safety and environmental standards. Drawing on lessons from around the world, we will make sure hydraulic fracturing for shale gas is done safely. Last month, the British Geological Survey published its report, and this is a really important way of looking at what the seismic experience has been and comparing it to other forms of production, both of energy but also other forms of manufacturing industry. And the report makes clear that the forecasting the occurrence of felt seismic events remains a scientific challenge for the geoscience community. However, it also makes clear that to improve our understanding, we need more exploratory sites to gather the necessary data. We think this is a sensible thing to look at, and that it would be unwise not to look at it, but it must have community support. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm almost coming to an end, and lots of people want to speak. I have taken a vast number of interventions, including three from the opposition. But I will give way to the honourable lady.
Thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and I would ask him to seriously consider the two aspects of this fracking. One is that it is unsafe in a country like United Kingdom, which has a very small landmass and much population. And it might be safe somewhere where there's thousands and thousands of miles of barren land, but not in a country like ours. And secondly, does he really want to see these hydraulic disgusting applications and buildings across our beautiful country?
I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and she is always a great contributor to this House, and she is right to raise the issue of safety, which will be fundamental to any proposal for the extraction of shale gas. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the world has changed, and our energy policy needs to recognise this. This government will make the difficult but necessary decisions to secure the nation's energy supply. Exploring our potentially substantial shale gas reserves is potentially an important part of this. But this must not be looked at in isolation. This is why we are exploring all avenues available to us, including solar, wind and nuclear. But we cannot ignore the importance of local gas production. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me reiterate the commitment, and I reiterate this particularly to my honourable and right honourable friends, that there is an absolute local consent lock. Any process to determine local consent must be run independently, and this House will vote on any scheme that we bring forward.
The original question was as on the order paper, since when Amendment A has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, given that the licensing of fracking and the planning process has evolved, I wasn't initially planning to participate in this debate, but given that the government has actually effectively made this a motion of confidence in the government, then it's only right that we participate and then outline the thoughts of the SNP. And no matter what the official government line is, the chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee earlier on confirmed that the Tory government is making this a vote of confidence in their own government. So that was clear. So while I do oppose fracking, and the SNP government has ruled out fracking in Scotland and introduced an effective ban on it, so I do agree fully with the motion in that respect. It's not for us to impose our views on what happens in England, but given that is a vote of confidence in the government, then we'll be voting for the motion to show that we've got no confidence in this utter shambles of a Tory government. Now, we've already heard interventions from Tory MPs on the Shadow Secretary, where they're saying how they're opposed to fracking and they want to represent their views of the constituents who oppose fracking. But they're going to vote for the government amendment. They're going to want to vote against the motion. So that makes no sense. If they've got any backbone, I would urge them to vote for a ban on fracking. Yeah, I'll give way.
Thank you. I'm grateful to him because the SNP are huge champions of local democracy. And therefore, does he accept that actually, if a local council were to support the idea of fracking, that does represent local consent? And does he agree that that should be the crucial issue involved, the support of the local council?
Well, it actually comes to the point I was going to make. If this is all about local democracy and actual democracy in itself, why is his government making his MPs vote in a way they say they don't want to vote? How are we going to trust them to implement some form of local democracy when MPs are getting forced against their will to vote for the government amendment? I'll give way there and then. Yep.
Thank you for giving way, because at least he's been honest in his speech today. He has made it quite clear that the only reason why he's intervening on what he believes is an English issue is because this is a vote of no confidence in the government. And surely he understands, therefore, why this ceases to be a debate about local democracy, where we get our gas from. This is all about a bit of political playing by the opposition.
The political playing's with them over there. They're the one that's made it a vote of confidence in the government, and they're the ones making their MPs vote in the way they say they don't want to vote. So it's not the opposition that's playing games. It's that lot over there. I'll quickly give way there, and then I'll need to make progress.
Member for giving way. I was a Lancashire County Council when this first came to Council 7 years ago. It was rejected then and overruled by the planning inspector. Since then, the public don't want it. Councils don't want it. His own backbenchers don't want it. In fact, I believe the leader of the Secretary of State's own council doesn't want it. Ministers also don't want it, apart from in their own backyard. Who actually wants fracking? So I can't think of anybody.
It's a good question, and that's more one for the Secretary to advance. It's quite clear that the new Secretary is in favour of it, and he's imposing his will on the rest of his party. Right, I'll quickly give way and then move on.
For giving way. What I would gently say to opposition members is many of us, and we've heard from a number of colleagues here, do not support fracking. And if they want to win the hearts and minds, the way to do it isn't by political games and stunts like this. To introduce a bill, there is no way that we can support the opposition taking control of the order paper. If they want to be serious about fracking, let's have a serious debate on fracking. By when the government brings forward that motion, we will be able to vote whether we support fracking or not. The way to do it is not to hijack the order paper and play political games with this decision.
I've got news for the honourable member. If she votes for the amendment, she's voting for the principle of fracking, no matter how she dresses that up.
You can't convince yourself otherwise.
And then, Mr Deputy Speaker, if we return...
The honourable gentleman said that anyone who votes with the government amendment is voting for fracking. That is not correct. As he and as you know, Mr Deputy Speaker, a vote for the government amendment is to vote for the Secretary of State to bring back a definition of local consent for this House to vote on before any fracking can conceivably move forward. Would it be possible for you, sir, from the Chair, to advise the honourable gentleman of what the truth of the matter is?
Right, let's hope there's no more devices like that. That clearly isn't a point of order for the Chair, but he's made his view known and it is on the record.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's great hearing how the Tory backbenchers are tying themselves in knots and arguing about why they're voting for the principle of fracking. If we go back to local consent, now the government motion talks about consulting regional mayors, local authorities and parishes, which is quite a vague concept and again kind of opens up to cronyism and political machinations. Although I do welcome the sentiment that is now talking about local referenda, it's good to know that this Tory government now believes in the principles of referendums for people to exercise their democratic right. And I look forward to Scotland being able to implement that next year. So I do welcome that Damascus conversion. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Tory government's newfound enthusiasm for shale gas, of course, isn't actually based on credible evidence. Now, they put forward arguments that it will increase energy security and it's also required because of the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine and the need to move away from reliance on Russian oil and gas imports. But really, they've arrived at a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. It's quite clear the UK already had a minimum reliance on Russian imports, and that's actually already managed to eliminate that small percentage of oil and gas imports that are coming from Russia. And if the argument is that it will reduce prices, then that's quite clearly not true either. It was the former B Secretary and now former Chancellor that admitted that any shale gas would be an internationally traded commodity that goes in the international market and that the traders will determine prices. So the only way that won't happen is unless there's another Damascus conversion and the government's planning some sort of nationalised energy company that will frack the shale gas and control that and put that in the domestic market, lowering prices, because otherwise it's all about the international market. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the harsh truth is as well the fact there isn't even enough firm evidence of what reserves are available in the basins that can be extracted. So without that knowledge, any talk of increasing energy security and reducing imports in the future is just pure fantasy at this stage. And that also means any talk of jobs and boosting local economies, it remains completely speculative. And again, there's no evidence on that.
It's clear as well.
Yep.
I thank the member for giving way. We are a country fortunate enough to house massive potential for development and harnessing of renewable energy. Does the member agree that in resorting to fracking, the government is essentially admitting that he has no interest in developing the skills, infrastructure, jobs or industries necessary for a green industrial revolution in this country?
I agree with him on that, and you'll have to look at the renewable energy revolution that's happening in Scotland. But of course, for going forward, for Scotland to fully embrace that potential, we clearly need the powers of independence and need to get away from these decision makers over there. And I'll quickly.
I thank the member for giving away, and at a time like this, I'm thankful for devolution as well, because my Northern Ireland Assembly colleagues were able to temporarily prevent fracking in Northern Ireland by banning PDR rights. Does the member share my concern that the Prime Minister is taking advantage of the cost of living crisis, and this, coupled with the removal of retained EU law, risks environmental degradation across these islands and does nothing to sustainably manage the climate crisis or the energy crisis?
I agree wholeheartedly. as already said, they're trying to present a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. It's problems that they're using to further their arguments, and I agree wholeheartedly with her. And final intervention then.
Very, very kind. Others wouldn't. Can I simply point out that he may know that satellite data for the United States shows that fugitive emissions of methane, namely the amount of methane which is leaked from fracking, is 5%. And given that methane is 80 times worse than CO2 for global warming, that makes fracking worse than coal. So how can anybody who's serious about net zero support fracking?
I think of that intervention, he certainly makes the point very well, and it's something we need to take cognizance of. And again, you have to doubt this government when they say we're committed to net zero by 2050. You do have to wonder, how serious are they about that? And they know 2050 is a while away. That's future governments away. So they can do what they want to now and pretend that they're still in favour of abiding with the net zero commitment. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, even if we accept some of the government arguments, there's also then the reality that exploration and appraisal phases of a fracking site is somewhere in the order of 2 to 5 years. So it's not even therefore possible that fracking can produce any sort of quick fix solution to the problems that they think they're trying to solve. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, if the Tory government are so worried about people's energy bills, then I have to ask, why did they do a screaming U-turn in the so-called energy price guarantee this week? The Prime Minister had told us previously she was going to prevent household energy bills rising to an astonishing £6,000. So presumably the UK government now believe, unfortunately for the majority of households in the UK, that at some point they might rise as high as £6,000 post-April 2023 when they're scrapping the energy price guarantee. And even if we don't think the bills will go that high, it's certainly Beezy's estimates in the energy prices paper was about 4,400, and papers this week were speculating it'll easily go up. Average bills could easily hit £5,000. So even if the government does bring forward measures that they say will protect the most vulnerable, bills going up to that price, allied with the record inflation, is still going to cause misery for millions and millions of people. And of course, this is households that are already seeing mortgage rates and mortgage costs increase directly as a consequence of the Prime Minister's ideological money budget. So already bad decisions this government's made was already affecting household expenditure, and obviously this is not the solution to it. And if you look at fuel poverty, National Energy Action estimate that even under the current support scheme, with average household bills estimated at £2,500, then there's going to be 6.7 million households in fuel poverty. And if bills got way higher than that, then we're looking at literally millions more in fuel poverty. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I had constituents that even a year and a half ago, when the average price cap, or the price cap was seeing that bills sat at an average of £1,100, they were struggling then, and some were in fuel poverty. So when we're looking at bills going up much more, there's going to be misery for many. So fracking does nothing to help them in the here and now, and I'd urge the government to start thinking about the support we're going to have to do to bring household energy bills down for people. And in that vein, other measures that should be taken, energy efficiency installation, they need to massively increase their commitment to upgrading homes to the target of EPC Band C. Energy efficiency installation, clearly it reduces energy demand, reduces a reliance on gas anyway for energy generation, it brings down household bills, and it creates jobs. In the past, or if we're looking at energy security, it's not that long ago that the UK government blocked the development of onshore wind. 6 years of onshore wind development that was blocked. Given that onshore wind is the cheapest form of energy generation, then it's quite clear, arguably, they've added cost to consumers' bills by blocking onshore wind. And again, that's electricity generation that could have been made in the UK, reducing the reliance on gas and reducing the reliance on imports. And why was onshore wind development banned? Well, that was because there were some loud Tory backbenchers who were against wind turbines, and they used that and some voices in the community to argue that local consent was not there for the provision of wind turbines. Of course, that was just using a few people to distort local democracy, and it was actually local democracy in reverse, Mr Deputy Speaker, because by overturning onshore wind right across the UK, that was imposing the view of a few people in the shires and the rest of the UK, making energy more expensive for the rest of us.
Would he give way?
Very briefly.
Would you agree that the main reason why people were opposed to onshore wind was because onshore wind is extremely land intensive, and the area that you take up for 10 fracking pads would require 725 times more land for windmills, which of course is a blot on the landscape.
I thank him for that intervention and proving where he is in the whole climate change denial aspect. I think most people, well, it's actually studies show time and time again, studies and surveys show people are in favour of onshore wind. So, and we know people are against fracking, so his argument's completely at odds with what the public thinks and probably what his own constituents think. Now, on energy security and further reducing reliance on gas, the government needs to bring forward a pricing mechanism for pump storage hydro. That's one way to meet peak dispatchable energy to hit peak demand. And SSE have already got all the permissions in place. We've got the funding there to be able to build the Corrie Glass scheme in the Highlands. All that is needed is a funding mechanism. Now, his predecessor actually said at the Bees Committee an evidence session that hadn't agreed a pricing mechanism, wasn't doing anything on it because it was a predominantly Scottish technology. So I'd urge the new Secretary to go over that mindset and realise that pump storage hydro is for the good of the grid and it's for the good of the UK as a whole.
Was that Honourable McGowan?
We're part of the grid, I'm afraid.
Right, hurry up. Yep.
Of course, the bit of the jigsaw, and this would be helpful to both the Scottish Government and the UK Government, is floating offshore wind production. We have the skills in Scotland in all parts of fabrication. We built some of the mightiest oil platforms ever built. So surely that is the way forward. And finally, to repeat my point again, generating the electricity out to sea can be taken in and leads to generation of green hydrogen.
I agree wholeheartedly with him, and I recommend he reads this report by Landfall Strategy, which actually illustrates that Scotland could have 385,000 jobs created in the future with by developing a green hydrogen strategy, and certainly that would certainly benefit his constituency. And I've been up to the Porteenig, and it's fantastic to see what their plans are for the future. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's quite clear then there's so much more the government can do. Fracking is not required, and it's not the actual answer going forward to reduce people's energy bills. It certainly won't do anything to help transition to net zero. We know it's opposed by the majority of the public, and it seems it is just a few people in this government that's trying to force their will in the rest of Parliament and possibly on these communities.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. The right honourable member for North East Somerset has brought to the House a proposal. Now, there's clearly disagreement on all over the House on that issue, but at least the honourable member is opening up for an honest debate on a very important matter. And what I would like, the honourable member has made a number of criticisms against the general energy policy of this government. And what I'd like to know is how the SNP are going to balance out energy security, given that they are actually saying they oppose nuclear and oil exploration and gas exploration.
Well, considering Scotland's already a net exporter of oil and gas, the equivalent of our domestic electricity consumption is already generated effectively 100% renewable energy. We export electricity, so I think it's quite clear that in terms of energy, Scotland can stand its own 2 feet, and actually it's time we're able to realise the benefits from being such an energy-rich country, because right now it seems to me the broad shoulders of the UK are preventing us realising the benefits that we should have. Mr Deputy Speaker, just to come to a conclusion, the SNP have introduced a ban on fracking, will not issue any fracking licences in Scotland. I would like to think that the UK Government will respect that aspect of the devolution settlement and not try and overturn what we are doing in Scotland, because if they do, that will add a further few percentage points of those that believe independence is the future for Scotland.
I've already indicated that it's a 6-minute limit, but because of the pressure of time, and I want to be fair to everybody, it'll be 6 minutes for Mr Menzies and Barbara Keeley, and then it drops immediately to 4 minutes so we can get as many people in as we possibly can. Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As always, it's a great pleasure to follow the member for Kilmarnock and Loudon. Anyone listening to us can clearly tell we come from the same part of the world. But, Mr Speaker, on to the matter before us today. It's a matter which is of great importance to my constituency of Fylde. And if I begin by saying to the Treasury bench that my vote today is very much conditional. Conditional on what the Secretary of State has already said, conditional on what the Prime Minister said to me today during Prime Minister's questions. But it is no secret that I would much rather the moratorium remain in place, and a moratorium that was a manifesto commitment which each and every one of us on this side of the House stood on, campaigned on and was elected on. And that was a manifesto commitment that said we will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. We in Fylde will not forget that fracking in our communities has twice led to national moratoriums. For people in Fylde, this is not a debate of what might happen. It's about not repeating events that have happened, events that have impacted on our countryside, our people, our homes, our communities. I continue, and I always have, to take an evidence-based approach. But the geology has not changed, nor has the science. The industry has had more than a decade to show that fracking can be carried out safely in Fylde. Every time they have tried, the same thing has happened. We cannot keep doing the same thing and hope for a different outcome. The 2019 seismic events proved this. The only conclusion on evidence that I can reach is that Fylde and its geology remain wholly unsuitable for fracking. And I say to the party opposite, had this motion remained unamended, then I simply could not have supported the government today. But as someone with genuine concerns about this matter, I am thankful to the party opposite for giving this House the opportunity to debate a critical issue. But on this, I'm afraid they have gone too far, because simply taking control of the order paper is not something I can support, as I similarly opposed it during the Brexit votes, and I am unwilling to open that Pandora's box again, because once we do, Mr Deputy Speaker, where on earth does it end? But the one thing, and my only objective, is to get the right outcome for the people of Fylde. May I gently remind the party opposite that it was the last Labour government that issued the fracking licences in Fylde. But they issued those licences without the gold standard of regulations that I fought for many years and secured. This included the traffic light system and the seismic limit of 0.5, both of which the fracking industry signed up to. The 2.9 event in Preston New Road in August 2019 was 251 times more powerful than the industry's own safety limit. In reply to me this afternoon, the Prime Minister mentioned that she would look very much at the regulations. Well, I urge her and the government to ensure that any look at regulations has at its heart the desire to maintain a safe approach to seismic limits. So were the limits to be raised to 3.5, bearing in mind Preston New Road was 2.9, if the industry was to have its way and those limits were to be raised to, say, 3.5, that would be 1,000 times more powerful than the previous limit of 0.5 and 4 times more powerful than the August 2019 event, the event that led to the second national moratorium. So my vote is based on the good faith that the Prime Minister has shown my constituents and myself over recent weeks, and in promises that she made earlier in this House. Can I also just say to the Secretary of State that he is very much excited by the prospect of local compensation and incentives to local communities. Do not confuse that with a thought that communities can be bought. The people of Fylde are not for sale, the principles are not up for auction, and they will look at this on the facts and the safety merits first and foremost on that. And so please don't confuse it. I'll happily give way. Yeah.
I thank the Honourable Judge for giving way, and he may not be aware, but when the fracking was happening in Clyde, I actually came out there to protest against it. And can I also though say to him, however, that you're talking about people being carried with this. Bolton South East and the whole of the North West has been against fracking. So I would ask the Secretary of State who's listening today that certainly we in the North West do not want fracking.
I would like to thank the Honourable Lady, and the point she made is a powerful one that stands on its own. But just coming back to the point in front of us today, in his letter, the Secretary of State has confirmed that the Government will launch a consultation next month to assess how local consent is to be gauged, and has committed to put this vote to the House. That is something I welcome. Can I also welcome that the Secretary of State has agreed today to ensure that there is, in effect, a local veto for whatever words you want to give it, that the voices of people in Fylde will be listened to in a fair way, a transparent way and an independent way, and I thank the Secretary of State for listening to that. It is not up to fracking companies to determine whether local consent exists. An independent, transparent way must be found, which is an alternative to that. And I thank the Treasury bench for agreeing to it. And can I also make clear that it's important that the local planning process must remain in place and that we rule out AD referral to NSIP. Because once again, if we are committed to localism, I can think of no more important issue than the one before the House today. But ultimately, I am able to vote for this amendment because I believe that people of Fylde share my conviction that the answer for our communities is no to fracking. And when they say no to fracking, I expect the government to deliver and to hear that no does mean no. I will give way. Yeah.
Agree that this is not only about seismic activity, and it is absolutely about local consent, but it is also about climate change, and that the government should really listen to the Committee of Climate Change and produce a report about the climate impact of fracking.
The Honourable Lady makes a very important point, and can I just actually say on the issue of energy security, there is nobody more committed to energy security than myself. We manufacture all the nuclear fuel for the UK and my constituency at Westinghouse. But in order to make up the shortfall of the amount of gas that we import, we will be looking at drilling somewhere in the region of 6,000 to 10,000 wells. I mean, so the quantities of what we're talking about is astronomical. And the timescales involved. It's not that we're not going to get gas into the network any time in the next 2 years. There is no infrastructure to get the gas from these wells into the grid. Or the alternative is you build gas-fired power stations in order to turn it into electricity and feed it in through wires. Again, the timescales involved just simply don't exist. So the energy security argument, important though it is, doesn't even stack up in the timescales that the government is talking about. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the fair, transparent and meaningful consultation that both the Prime Minister and my honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is committed to today. That gives the people of Fylde the opportunity to reject fracking, but more importantly, it gives the people of Fylde an opportunity to have their voice heard. Thank you.
Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary has been sacked or resigned this afternoon. This is utter chaos. The Prime Minister appears to have appointed and sacked both the Chancellor and a Home Secretary, two of the great offices of state, in the space of 6 weeks. This is no way to run a government. Mr Deputy Speaker, have you had any indication from the Prime Minister that she will come to this House to answer questions from this. The Home Secretary, the former Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Fareham, says in her resignation letter that she sent an official document draft written ministerial statement on migration from her personal email, which she says was due for publication and was against the rules. It raises huge questions about why a Home Secretary who was responsible for security was breaching basic rules. There are also rumours that, in fact, this statement on migration she refers to had not been agreed across the government, that there were major disagreements and that this had been blocked by the Chancellor. She also says in her statement she has concerns about the direction of the government, about the breaking of key pledges, and says very pointedly that when we have made mistakes and hoping things will magically come right is not serious politics. There is clearly a huge chaos at the heart of the government, Mr Deputy Speaker. Home Affairs is far too important for this kind of chaos. This is about security, public safety and the issues covered by the great offices of state. Given that the government seems to just be imploding, Deputy Speaker, we clearly need not simply a change of Home Secretary, but a change of government. Can we get a statement to this House?
I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Lady for her point of order and her advance notice of it. I was made aware of the departure of the Home Secretary in the usual way, but she is asking the question as to whether I have been notified in a usual way as to whether there would then be a statement. I have not been notified as such, but should the situation change, then members will be notified via the Annunciator and other means. So, as it stands at this moment, there are no statements to be made today. We're still on the 6-minute limit, and then we drop to 4 minutes. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Fracking is an outdated, dangerous and expensive way to produce energy. It causes disruption and distress to local communities, and crucially, it will not provide the clean, secure energy that our country needs. And that was laid out, I think, very effectively by my right honourable friend on the front bench when he opened the debate earlier. I have a former exploratory site for fracking at Barton Moss in my constituency. The energy company iGas drilled the site to a depth of about 10,000 feet in an exploratory exercise over the course of 6 months between 2013 and 2014. During that time, there was much local opposition and a fierce protest, which resulted in months of demonstrations. 150 police officers were involved in policing the protest every day, and a total of 120 people were detained. Greater Manchester Police had to pay £1.7 million for the cost of policing the protest, which came out of our local policing budget. At the time, the Manchester Evening News ran a survey of 2,500 local residents. This showed that over 3/4 of local people were opposed to fracking. I want to explain why I have always opposed fracking and why the reasons for my constituents' opposition are so justified. Some of the issues are local to Barton Moss. The exploratory fracking site is close to an area of raised peat bog, which is a rare and precious resource where it hasn't been ruined by over-extraction. There are real concerns among my constituents about dewatering those precious mosslands and the harmful effects of pumping water into underground rock to force out the shale gas in this mosslands area. People are also very concerned about air pollution, which is particularly worrying at Barton Moss because the site is next to the M62 motorway, itself a cause of high levels of pollution. Other environmental risks are not specific to Barton Moss, but they do have an extensive evidence base. I want to quote from a report by the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research produced by local academics at the University of Manchester. The depth of shale gas extraction gives rise to major challenges in identifying categorically pathways of contamination of groundwater by chemicals used in the extraction process. An analysis of these substances suggests that many have toxic, carcinogenic or other hazardous properties, There is considerable anecdotal evidence from the United States that contamination of both ground and surface water has occurred in a range of cases. So perhaps the government should listen to its own experts. A few weeks ago, the British Geological Survey published a report on fracking which was commissioned by the government. It said, hydraulic fracturing can trigger earthquakes large enough to cause structural damage. These events were not predicted in advance of operations. Clearly, the science does not show categorically that fracking can be done safely. For the government to allow fracking now, therefore just breaks another election promise. On this, yes, indeed.
For giving way. She was speaking earlier about the protests in her constituency. As an honourable member, perhaps the only honourable member in this House to have been arrested, tried and acquitted for protesting about fracking, does she share my concerns about the public order bill that was passed yesterday, that actually the peaceful protest, which is entirely legitimate around things like fracking, might well be closed down by this draconian piece of legislation?
Absolutely, yes indeed, and of course we voted against that yesterday.
Would my honourable friend give way? She's making a very, very powerful case on behalf of her constituents, but does she share my puzzlement? The government has made a screeching U-turn today because it has finally committed to a local veto. And every member who has spoken, representing areas where there has been fracking or there might be fracking, has made it quite clear there is no prospect of getting local consent. There will be a veto everywhere. Why are we going through this whole process when every one of us knows what the outcome's going to be?
Yeah. It's a puzzle to me, as it is to my right honourable friend. Going back to the report of the British Geological Survey, on the same day on which this report was published, the Business Secretary announced his intention to revisit the safety limits on fracking. He said, tolerating a high degree of risk and disturbance appears to us to be in the national interest. I don't know if that answers my friend's question, but it's weird. Now his amendment indicates he will seek clear advice on seismic limits and safety. Which is it? Tolerating earthquakes and dangerous tremors, or listening to the evidence commissioned by his own department? Mr Deputy Speaker, fears about pollution, contaminated water supply and seismic events are by no means far-fetched. An earthquake caused by fracking near Blackpool measured 2.9 on the Richter scale. It led to the works being stopped immediately and the company responsible apologising. Other concerns about drilling for shale gas extend beyond the environmental. In 2014, a DEFRA report forecast that house prices were likely to fall by up to 7% within a mile of fracking wells, and that the price of house insurance would also rise within 5 miles of fracking wells. It is right that we end our reliance on Russian oil and gas, but fracking is neither the solution nor part of the solution. The government should instead be focusing on boosting the UK's use of renewable and nuclear energy. Fracking is an issue of great importance to my constituents, and voting on it should not be used as a confidence vote by this failing Conservative government trying to bully its members into line. And there is an alternative. Labour's plan for energy would quadruple offshore wind and double onshore wind capacity. And instead of blocking new solar projects, as the Prime Minister is planning to do, Labour would triple solar power, which is up to 9 times cheaper than gas. It is irresponsible to revisit the question of fracking when we know it will have profound environmental impacts and make life very difficult for those people living near a fracking site. It's ignoring what happened in the past. It's ignoring scientific and expert opinion. It's reckless and it's dangerous. The flimsy measures in the government's amendment to today's motion are another case of moving the goalposts to achieve their own aims. Before it was safety, but the report they commissioned isn't to their liking. Now it's about consent. But the Secretary of State should know that we already have a robust system of local consent. It's called listening. I know my constituents don't want fracking because they have made it very clear indeed. So when, Mr Deputy Speaker, I ask, will the government respect the evidence, respect the experts and the public, and finally put this threat of this awful process of fracking to rest?
Moving to 4 minutes, Craig McKinley.
Mr Deputy Speaker, now, we often wonder why we're not taken very seriously in this House. And I'll tell you why. We're in the depths of an energy crisis. We have shown ourselves being too reliant, Europe as a whole, on a dictator who has been conducting an illegal war and the problems have come home to roost. And here we are, speaking about trying to ban a source of domestic energy while we are short of it. And we wonder why people out there think we are stark staring mad.
We are crazy.
But of course, today's debate isn't about fracking. It isn't about fracking at all. It's about taking control of the order paper. And we saw that before, during the height of the Brexit wars. My dear friend sitting opposite was part of that.
Nuisances.
But I'm really sorry that the member for Doncaster North isn't in his place, because I did try and intervene on him. He didn't show me that courtesy. If he'd been in his place, I'd have shown him the courtesy now. Because there are a couple of things that I think need to be said. It's been raised here that it will make no difference to the price of gas. Now, I don't know about anybody else in this House, but when I did O-level economics, the first week, no, probably the first lesson, it said if you put more of a supply of something into a system, the price tends to come down.
Is it?
But further than that, even if Labour economics are true, that the price will not change, would one rather spend tens of billions of pounds per year on foreign imported LNG, even at a high price, or would we rather be spending that money at home? I think that's a very clear decision. I would refer no, I won't give away. I haven't got time today, and others haven't done it for me. I will get Madam, please, yes, do. It gives me another minute. Thank you.
I thank him for giving way. Has he not listened to his own colleague? That actually it will take at least 2 years to get any fracking going. And secondly, that his own colleague, when he was still the base secretary, said only a few weeks ago that no amount of fracked fuel in this country will make a difference to the global gas market because the quantities are too small.
Hurrah!
Well, I thank the Liberal Democrat member for being on her feet for that point, because I do remember a former leader of the Liberal Democrats saying about 12 years ago, what is the point in nuclear, because it will take about 11 or 12 years to get it on stream. I think that 10, 11, 12 years back onward from 2010 would be about now, and that would have been quite useful. Of course, it will take time to get frack gas out the ground. The best time to have done it was a few years ago. The second best time to think about it is now. I would refer members to a House of Commons Library report dated 14th of January of this year, and it's called the Energy Price Crunch. As ever, House of Commons Library reports are excellent, but this one was very clear. Table 4.2, it has a very easy chart, and let me describe it to members. It has the output of UK-produced gas from the North Sea, and that peaked at around 2004. Where we were net exporters of gas. Since then to now, we are actually using only about 75% of that peak use that we once used in the country. That may be for many reasons. We may have better insulated houses. That's to the good. I feel pretty sure one of the main reasons is that any high energy intensive business has simply offshored somewhere else, but let's just put that aside. What has happened really distinctly is we are now only producing a third of what we did at peak. So we're using 25% less, and we are producing only a third of what we once did. Where do you think that gap is coming from? That gap is coming from international resources. I mean, there are 3 countries alone, forgetting Norway, £64 billion we've spent over the last 10 years on importing LNG from Russia, Qatar, and the US. Now, surely it's got to be better to have those jobs at home, tens of thousands of them, that investment at home, many billions, tax revenues, do you remember that? Profits and tax revenues, pretty helpful, you know, that pays for things. The NHS, perhaps for the insulation that we'd all very much support.
Your wages.
And do you know what would be quite useful? Balance of payments, because we're always running a pretty bad show on that. But if CO2 is your thing, and it's certainly my thing, why are we importing LNG, 5 million tonnes of extra CO2, just in the process of importing it, rather than doing it domestically. So anyway, this debate is a valid one. It's for other reasons that we're very aware of, because shown by Labour. But I support fracking. Let's give it a go. There is no government money involved, all private.
Thank you very much. Bill Esterson.
Lancashire County Council's ecology advisor described Aurora's assessment of earthquake risk at the Altcar Moss fracking site as superficial, outdated and not justified. Well, my constituents nearby in Formby agree with the ecology advisor because their houses shook when tests were carried out. And my constituents have been saying for years that the Conservative plan is a charter for earthquakes, because that's been their experience as elsewhere nearby in Lancashire. Conservative MPs stood on a manifesto which said, "We will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically it is safe." Changing the safety threshold doesn't change the level of risk. And changing the safety threshold when the science hasn't changed won't convince my constituents or people across the country either. I can tell the government that people in Sefton and in West Lancashire are not going to support fracking, and if the government think they can manipulate fake consent, people simply won't be fooled. And as for the impact on the environment, the Environment Agency says contamination of groundwater has not been addressed by fracking companies. Natural England say that fracking applicants haven't produced evidence that their plans would have no significant effect on wildlife either. Turning then to the government's claims. First, the gas price. Fracking won't help because the price is set by on the European market. Second, the immediate challenge of supply. Fracking will take time to produce gas even if the government chooses to ignore local people. It won't deliver in the short term. Third, climate. Producing more fossil fuels is just going to make the climate crisis worse. Haven't we seen enough evidence of the acceleration of the climate crisis, with storms, floods and extreme heat in this country, let alone around the world? We need to do everything we can to end our reliance on greenhouse gas producing fuel. Introducing fracking will add carbon emissions to our atmosphere. Fracking is climate action delay, and to delay is to deny the reality that we face a climate disaster and all its consequences unless we act with all speed. The only sensible way forward is to invest in wind and solar to deliver renewable electricity self-sufficiency, as we on this side of the House will do by 2030, to invest in insulating 19 million homes, to invest in new nuclear, in tidal, in hydrogen, in carbon capture and storage, to create a publicly owned great British energy company we can be proud of and which will deliver in the national interest. There are 1 million jobs in Labour's energy plan. There are lower bills. There is energy security. Labour's long-term plan will create a world-leading renewable energy industry where we can export our technology around the world. Our plan is the right way to address the energy challenge. Fracking is completely the wrong way, whether it's in Formby or anywhere else in Britain. My constituents are right to oppose fracking, and Labour in government will make that investment in renewable energy and ban fracking for good.
Robin Walker.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I do not support ending the moratorium on fracking, as I don't believe that new scientific evidence has yet emerged which would justify this. It has been welcome to hear in recent days the Prime Minister and the Chancellor talking about the importance of our 2019 manifesto, and I agree with both when it comes to the triple lock on pensions and the moratorium on fracking. I do suggest I do support the UK, as the Secretary of State has said, maximising its domestic supply of gas to support transition to net zero, the production of the support for new technologies for heating, including hydrogen for heating, and the importance of our supplies for our energy security. But we should do so in ways that are proven to be safe. I will not vote for the opposition motion today, and I urge all colleagues on our side of the House not to do so, as it is a blatant attempt to seize control of the order paper, as they tried to do so many times in their efforts to thwart Brexit. I welcome the assurances of my right honourable friends on the front bench that there will be consultation with parishes, councils and other local bodies to ensure that there is a tough requirement for local consent. But I don't think there can really be such a thing unless local planning committees can simply say no. If they do, then I can't see how fracking is ever likely to impact on energy prices, certainly not in time to impact heating costs this year or the next. And I therefore want to put on record my concerns and those of thousands of my constituents. Let's take action to help people with the cost of living, protect our environment and deliver on our 2019 manifesto.
Thank you very much. We now come to Lynn Brown.
Mr. Speaker, frankly, it's becoming difficult to adequately express my horror at the state of this government. Every single decision seems calculated to destroy our economy, our public services, our international reputation, and our environment too. This utter nonsense about fracking is another example. Truth is, there's very little prospect of fracking in West Ham, and I don't think our communities are going to be affected by consequent earthquakes or polluted water supplies. But over recent weeks, I've had loads of emails from constituents extremely concerned about the direction that the government's taking. They're worried about how the communities that could be affected, because they know how the local consent can be and is manipulated to suit agendas of the powerful. My constituents point to the constant Tory failure to prevent vile sewage pollution, and they ask why anybody would trust a government if it says that fracking wells won't destroy local water supplies. The party opposite has proven time and time again they're simply not willing or capable to stop greedy companies, whether they're privatised water utilities or frackers, from destroying our environment in the pursuit of profit. The issue of fracking is about the safety of our world and the future of our children, and so of course the people of West Ham want to have their say. They don't want us to respond to the cost of living crisis by simply increasing our dependence on the exact same technologies that destroyed it. They don't want to pretend that fracking can make a difference to energy costs, blighting our lives, because it won't. So my constituents want us to get to work on speeding up the green transition that they've been promised. They point out, quite rightly, that wind and solar power are enormously cheaper than gas, and that these technologies are getting more and more efficient with every passing year. In this place, we need a focus from government to plan, to invest and to lead partnerships with green business. We know that if we do, there will be a huge economic benefit in terms of lower energy bills and jobs in all of our communities. And if we do that, we can slash our dependence on fossil fuels from Russia and from other anti-democratic bullying states. We can't move away from that dependence, though, by extracting fossil fuels at home. There ain't enough of it. And the cost, social, economic and environmental, is way too high. And we're rapidly approaching COP27. Effectively, we are asking and expecting poor African states like the DRC to do the right thing and develop their economies with minimum amount of dirty energy. We're talking about countries who have much larger fossil reserves than us, enormously lower emissions than us, and a much higher vulnerability to climate heating than us. And we're asking them to choose a greener path to development when ministers here are shamefully speaking about extracting, and I quote, every last drop. It's madness. As an energy strategy, it will be devastating for local communities who transparently don't want it, and it drives a wrecking ball through the patient climate diplomacy that this world desperately needs.
Graham.
Mr Deputy Speaker, there is, of course, one great example of fracking in West Ham, which is fracking good football, which many of us saw at Upton Park and now at the new stadium. But today is an interesting debate, because, unfortunately, for all the eloquence of the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North, who made in many ways a very good speech about some of the hazards of fracking, it has been spoilt by the 3.5 pages, which is all about a procedural takeover of this chamber. So that, I'm afraid, rules out voting for the Labour motion straight away. Now, the interesting contribution from the SNP focused on the fact that in the Honourable Member for Kilmarnock's view, there is no support for fracking anywhere in the country. And we've heard echoes of this from several members from the opposition benches. Now, I do not support fracking. I don't think it should happen. I don't think it will happen. But this is a democracy. And it is perfectly possible that there are parts of the country, it might be South Thanet, it might be Ashfield, it might be elsewhere, which do support fracking. Not in the centre of the city of Gloucester, no. But it is perfectly possible in a democracy, listen, that there are places in the country which might support it. And that is where the question which the Right Honourable Member himself raised in 2013, which the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party has said before is vital, is the question of local consent. Now, I do think that the Secretary of State is on a journey on this. He started, frankly, by assuming that local consent could be a consultation done by the fracking company of the few houses around where a fracking site might happen. That was clearly not sustainable. It's clearly not genuine consultation. It clearly does not take into account enough views. My own view, for what it's worth, is that the two crucial elements of local consent, which I hope he will bring back to the House after his consultation, is firstly, local planning control, not by the inspectorate nationally, and secondly, and this is also, I think, important in terms of local consent, a recognition that local councils are the expression of local democracy. That is absolutely at the core of compassionate conservative values, and I think shared by many people across the House, and that vote by a full council is the most important part. With those two considerations, and I hope the party managers are listening, a free vote on the floor of the House, the party managers are talking amongst themselves, but I hope they're listening, a free vote when the local consent definition comes back to this House will give everyone here the absolute confidence that there will be no fracking in any constituency unless there is absolute local support. And that is the crucial question today. I give way, of course.
Mr Deputy Speaker, for the interest of the House, I'm very sorry that there are no members of the Scottish National Party with us just now. It is a fact that where councils in Scotland make a planning decision, for instance to refuse a wind farm application, it is quite frequently overturned by the Scottish Government. So the rhetoric about local power can be hollow.
The Honourable Member makes a very good point, and it's disappointing in a way that members of this House from the SNP are not here to hear that point, because they're huge supporters, in theory, of renewable energy. And can I just very quickly answer the point on renewable energy, because there is a great deal that the Secretary of State has said and written, not least in a very good article in The Guardian a week ago, about renewable energy, which is excellent. And we would all get behind. So would all, I suspect, members of the opposition parties. I would love him to do more. Hold on one second. I'd love him to do more on supporting tidal lagoons, which could have been done by now in Swansea. They seemed expensive at the time. They seem very good value now. There is a lot more that can be done on marine energy, which contributes to base load. And there are lots of other things, rules on onshore, floating offshore, you name it. All of those, he is absolutely on the right track, and so is this government. And members and the wider public should recognise this. This government is doing a huge amount on renewables. But this question of local consent on fracking is critical. Can I give way first to my honourable friend and then to Dalton?
I'm obliged to him for giving way. He's very generous to do so. Would not the answer to the question being put to him by the Liberal Democrats be my suggestion earlier, that one removes the right to appeal to an inspector in fracking applications and allows the local planning authority to be the final determinant of it?
Well, he's absolutely right. I mean, so often Yorkshiremen are right, aren't they? The Minister knows all about that. But the key thing is that local planning approval should be absolutely at the heart of the definition of local consent. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. It will be brief. The Secretary of State used the word veto, not objection. It was a veto. So there's no business of appeals or anything else, because if the local community veto it, it's dead, strangled, kaput.
Well, I think we're all broadly in agreement on that. I hope the ministers are in listening mode on this. I do think that the perfect solution would have been to get back to the 2019 manifesto, which the Prime Minister's urged us to do in so many instances, and therefore to have got back to the moratorium that we were at. That was a settled position. The whole country accepted it. But nonetheless, I recognise there are some colleagues who think there may be virtue, and as the Secretary of State likes to say, his 9-word mantra, everything has changed because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That is true, and there may be worse to come. Who knows what nuclear weapons might be deployed and what impact that has on energy and all the rest of it. So we should accept, and I think the Labour Party should accept also, it is possible that there is a role for shale gas. Should the scientific evidence support it? Should local consent indicate that they do support it? And it is fair enough for the Secretary of State to say we should look at it. Yeah. But I urge him to have a free vote on that definition when it comes back to the House.
Thank you. Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fracking again. To be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, since the moment I was elected to this House, I've been speaking, I think, in probably every single debate on this subject, because for my constituents in Lancashire, this is something that really matters. It has a tangible effect on their lives, with the fracking application on Preston New Road and Rosica, in my honourable friend's constituency, and it matters because of the climate emergency, which I think that we risk losing sight of if we keep focusing purely on tackling the energy crisis and cost of living crisis, as important as they are. We cannot forget that the planet is burning, and therefore all of the conversations we have around energy have to bear in mind that there is a climate emergency and that needs to be addressed. Now, for a bit of background, after I was elected in 2015, the County Council at Lancashire passed its first motion opposing fracking. That was followed 3 months later by Lancaster City Council passing a motion against fracking. And then, of course, Quadrilla get the permission and they start fracking at Preston New Road. And at that point, we see subsequent motions objecting to fracking from councils across the county, including Lancaster City Council passing its second motion. It was clear that there was cross-party consensus and huge public dismay about fracking, which is why in 2019, during the general election, when the Conservative Party changed its policy and stood on a manifesto that pledged to ban fracking, I think there was a sense of widespread relief in our Red Rose County, because there was that cross-party consensus. The people of Lancashire thought that the issue had been put to bed. They thought that they could be safe knowing that there wasn't going to be earthquakes, safe that there wasn't going to be fracking wells littering the foul coast. But no, fracking is back, and we still don't want it. Local councillors of all political colours are backing motions at councils right across the county, including in this week alone one at Fylde and one at Lancashire County Council, both Tory-run councils voting unanimously to pass anti-fracking motions. And what councillors are telling me is that they do not understand what this local consent looks like. They do not know what it looks like. And I suppose my question to the Minister is, what on earth does he mean by local consent? Many people have been very concerned by the Business Secretary's comments at the Conservative Party conference, talking about fracking companies going door to door to canvass support for fracking. And I do hope that will not be included in the consultation, and I would like it if the Minister for Climate Change could rule that out in his closing remarks to this debate. The people of Lancashire don't want to have fracking forced upon them. Yes, we live in tough times. Yes, the energy bills are going up, but fracking will not solve the energy security or the price issues in the UK currently faces. We need to see the government putting far more energy into looking at energy reduction, home insulation, and frankly, the only viable long-term route to lower bills and energy security is to get off fossil fuels. Unfortunately for the Minister, the answer's staring us clear in the face, because clean energy like solar, wind, tidal, hydrogen and nuclear are all options which this government should be throwing its full weight behind. And it's why the last Labour leadership at Lancaster City Council led the way installing solar panels on public buildings like our Saltaire Sports Centre. It's why the big employers in my constituency like Lancaster University are seeking permission for more wind turbines. It's why local businesses like Nanosun in Lancaster are looking to harness hydrogen, and why the nuclear power stations at Heysham 1 and 2 provide my constituents with thousands of jobs. Lancashire will play its part with enthusiasm in a green energy revolution. We know it makes sense when solar and wind power, for example, are 9 times cheaper than gas, but fracking, no thanks. Fracking is expensive, it's unsafe, and we know that communities in Lancashire do not support it.
Thank you. As the House can see, there are a great many people who wish to speak, and we have very little time left. So after the next contribution, I will have to reduce the time limit to 3 minutes. Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to reaffirm my opposition to fracking in Rother Valley. I believe I'm the only colleague in the House who not only has 2 potential fracking sites in my constituency, Hart Hill Woodsets, but who also actually lives in one of those villages threatened, in Hart Hill. My position since being elected has been consistent. I oppose fracking in our area, and it was indeed the very first thing I spoke about in the House of Commons chamber after being elected. And indeed, I rebelled against the government on the issue in May 2021, being the only Conservative to actually vote to ban all fracking, including exploration. Therefore, I was looking forward to reconfirming this in the House today. But the motion before us is not about fracking. It's about confidence in this government. It is about who runs the country, the elected party, the Conservatives, or Labour, who lost the general election. This, unfortunately, is a cynical attempt by Labour to play party political games. This is not a game. These are people's lives. These are people's communities. It's a dastardly cynical move to create division, to weaponise this issue, rather than working together on a cross-party basis to put a ban on fracking. And this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what's wrong with the state of our politics. All that matters is cheap. They're laughing at Centre, they're laughing at the people of Hart Hill, they are laughing at the people of Woodsets, because these are cheap point scoring, ultimately chasing misleading headlines rather than working with us on this side of the House to make better policy for our communities. Let me get clear, fracking is unnecessary, it's harmful to the environment, and will have no impact on international gas prices. It is yesterday's technology and not an answer to today's problems. Now, I've had several meetings with the Business Secretary on this matter, and we have heard him today at this chamber, and he has made it crystal clear that there must be a majority of local, independent, he said, community support in order for fracking to proceed. He used the words a veto. But let's be honest, in some parts of the country, there may indeed be that support. Now, let me get this clear. I am the elected Member of Parliament for Rother Valley. I'm not the member for Rhondda. I represent Hart Hill, not Hartlepool. Woodsets, not Woking. Who am I to dictate the rest of the UK what other communities want? That is undemocratic. What is clear, though, in my local villages is there is no community support for fracking. And we have today been given a cast-iron guarantee that these changes will at last put communities, even down to the parish level, at the heart of any future decision. No more worries about the changing nature of government, and those that are directly affected by this will ultimately have the last say, and that is correct. Now, Hart Hill and Woodsets are riddled with old mine workings, and the fault lines are already severely weakened by coal extraction, right beneath where companies wish to frack. My constituents do not wish to live next to an industrial site. The traffic movement associated with fracking presents a huge risk to pedestrian safety, and could destroy local flora and fauna and ruin the unspoilt countrysides. However, and even the proposed site in Woodsets is only yards from a residential home of the elderly and vulnerable, which is deeply depressing. Now, let me make this clear again. I am against fracking in Rother Valley, but I'm also against the disgraceful attempt by Labour to overturn the government. The government policy today is announced gives more power to local residents to reject fracking, and I want them to reject fracking. And I can reassure this House that when there is that local community vote, the vote that actually matters to communities, and as a resident of Hart Hill, I'll be getting a vote on this, I will not only be voting against fracking in Rother Valley, I will be leading the charge on this issue.
Great speech. Now, on a time limit of 3 minutes, Tim Farron.
Speaker, I'm very grateful. So why on earth would the government seek to perform another manifesto U-turn and support fracking, which their amendment does, effectively lifts the moratorium on fracking? There are 2 reasons which are stated. One is an attempt to drive down energy prices, the other is to tackle security of supply. Those are 2 massive issues, enormous energy poverty in my constituency in Cumbria, and everybody rightly worried about the lack of energy security given particularly the evil actions of President Putin. But if those were the real reasons, you wouldn't pick fracking. And I'm absolutely astounded and bemused as to why they have. The Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, stated that it would not materially affect the market price for gas. That's obvious. So that's pricing out of the window. The fracking industry lobby group says that shale gas would contribute less than 1% of Britain's gas needs. And the British Geological Survey says that shale gas under the United Kingdom contributes 15 times less in volume than was originally thought. So it will have no impact on price, and it will do nothing meaningful when it comes to volume. So what it will do is add another fossil fuel into the mix at a time when we should be keeping all the fossil fuels in the ground because of all the threats that we face as a country and as a community. Climate change is undoubtedly the greatest. Fossil fuels should be kept in the ground. It will also create massive seismic risks. The northwest of England, Cumbria and Lancashire, two of the most geologically active places in the country. Fracking is madness. Using and opting for fracking is divisive and expensive, whereas renewables are popular and cheap.
On that point,
happily, yeah.
I've again and again, Madam Speaker, gone on about green energy and hydrogen creation. Hydrogen is green and clean. We've got to get serious about this. And would the member agree with me that it's vital that all the governments in the United Kingdom work together fast and now?
I think green hydrogen is absolutely essential part of the mix, and I agree with my honourable friend that if the government was trying to change policy quickly in order to do something that would radically make a difference quickly, then they will be opting for renewables. The United Kingdom after Canada, has the highest tidal range on planet Earth, and yet we are tapping nearly none of it. Why are we not investing in wind, in solar, allowing farmers to diversify it and to be part of the happily give way? Yes.
Just popped up. It's very generous with your time, by the way, but I wonder if you can recall when your leader says, "I love shale gas. It is much cleaner than coal, and we need more gas. I hope we get loads of it."
My leader, when he was, of course, Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, was responsible for the United Kingdom increasing renewables by 20% every year, which dropped by 3% when he left office. And if he's concerned about leaders changing their mind, the party opposite is led by someone with more flip-flops than Benidorm. So we are not going to take any lessons from that side of the House. So renewables are the answer. They are quick and they are popular. My concern is that why on earth would a government, why on earth, no, there are other people who need to get it, and the Minister needs to be patient and wait his turn. Because my concern in all this is, what does this say about the government? It is not rational to choose shale gas and fracking at a time when it is obvious it will not have an impact on reducing prices or improve energy security, when instead the government could be moving towards tidal, marine, hydro, wind and solar. Not rational. But what is also not rational is the fact that earlier this day, the Right Honourable Member for Calder Valley, the government chief whip, wrote to every Conservative MP saying that this matter is not about fracking, it is a matter of confidence. And this causes a great problem for members opposite. They either have to vote to end the moratorium on fracking, which is enormously unpopular. Only 19% of the British people support fracking. The overwhelming majority are opposed to it, including in my constituency. So they've either got to support fracking or they've got to vote to bring down the government. That is an irrational thing for the government to seek to put before this House. And the difficulty is we're beginning to see a pattern of irrational behaviour at the centre of our government. That if we care about our energy supplies, the cost of energy, the enormously painful cost of living that is a threat to every single family in this country, we care about those things, our economy, we cannot have people in high office and leading the government party who are acting consistently, illogically and irrationally. And this is an irrational proposal, and that is why it is right the government should give way and why we should be opposing fracking, and it's why I will be voting to oppose fracking today. I challenge members opposite to ignore their whips and vote to end fracking.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me be clear for my constituents. I do not support fracking and will not be voting for it in the future. But and it's very clear from my constituents of their concerns. I am encouraged, and the Honourable Member for North Dorset is quite right, that the Secretary of State has given a commitment that the local residents will have a veto over any plans for fracking. So the moratorium stays in Sussex, because I'm pretty confident my residents will not be supporting it. But can I just echo the concerns around planning, where we are seeing on on a daily basis are refusals for planning being overturned by the planning inspector, and I want reassurance from the Minister that that will not happen in cases of fracking. And maybe this is an opportunity to look at the role of the planning inspector overall, as well as looking at how we can respect the wishes locally when it comes to fracking. But let's also be clear that this motion today is to agree on the date when there will be a vote on a bill to ban fracking. It's not actually a vote on banning fracking today. And what I'm amazed at the sheer brass neck of the opposition is they are often criticising this government for having a legislation rushed through, having all stages on one day. And yet that's exactly what they're proposing in their order paper. They often say these issues are too important, too many colleagues want to speak, there's not enough time to debate amendments. That is what is in their motion today. All stages of a bill in one day. Is that the indication of this government in waiting that they so-called claim to be? And just while I have time, Madam Deputy Speaker, I pointed out to the Shadow Secretary of State his hypocrisy in saying that he did, and he said this at the Labour Party conference, there was a role for fracking when he was leader of the Labour Party, but it bears no resemblance to the brass neck of the Liberal Democrats, who, as usual, when they were in government, say one thing, and then when they're in opposition, say another. I will not give way. There's not enough time to give way. When the leader of the Liberal Democrats was the Energy Secretary, not only did he lift restrictions on fracking, he also voted against a ban on fracking in 2015. And as my honourable friend said, was quoted in 2013 in saying, "There's an awful lot of nonsense talked about fracking. I love shale gas. It's much cleaner than coal. We need more gas. I hope we get loads of it." Well, I will say the same thing to my constituents, whether today or tomorrow. I will not support fracking, whether I'm a government minister or I'm a backbencher, and I will hope that when this does come to the floor in the House, and I will not support fracking when it does, that I will be, my constituents will see that I will stand by every word that I say.
Yeah. Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. That was the 2019 Conservative manifesto. We will only allow fracking where there is local consent. That was the Prime Minister in her leadership bid this summer. There is no new science and there is no local consent. Indeed, in July this year, the government commissioned a report, which has already been quoted today, from the British Geological Survey investigating the impact of fracking. The report showed no new science, but concluded that forecasting earthquakes as a result of fracking remains a challenge. Extracting shale gas through fracking in the hope of offsetting the energy crisis will not work. Implementing the process is expensive and returns simply not enough to make a significant difference to our energy sector. It was the member for Spelthorne that stated that fracking won't materially affect the wholesale market price. It would do nothing to cut bills, costing far more than renewables, and it is unsafe. Even the founder of the fracking company Quadrilla has stated that fracking is not safe nor viable in the UK. It is clear to see that nobody in the UK other than the government wants this plan to go ahead. Given that the 50% of the last round of fracking licences were in Yorkshire, people in Barnsley are concerned about the government's disastrous plans to reintroduce fracking. Only 17% of the public support the practice. The Business Secretary claims he would be happy to allow fracking in his back garden, but he does not speak for the rest of the country, and he certainly does not speak for the people of Barnsley.
Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I just thank my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. He's a long-standing friend for how he's approached today. I think the assurances he has given to the House should be taken seriously and with the sincerity with which he made them, and I think certainly have been enormously helpful. My opposition to fracking is well known, and I would say to anybody who is uncertain as to the merits of new exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels, watch on playback, if you didn't see it on Sunday, the concluding episode of Frozen Planet 2. Only an idiot would think that our planet could sustain new forms and new exploitations of fossil fuels into our environment. Now, I'm absolutely convinced, and I'm not entirely sure why this has been made a matter of confidence, and I'm still less certain, Madam Deputy Speaker, why His Majesty's Government has decided to resurrect what I thought had been an issue which had been interred quite properly some little while ago. It's not going to happen. These are bald men fighting over a comb. It's not going to occur. No local community is going to grant consent. I would love to vote against fracking tonight, but like my honourable friend for Hazel Grove, I want to keep my voice and my vote to help shape the future of the party I've been a member of since 1985. And I'm not prepared to throw that away on an issue which is actually not, as I say, going to happen. However, and I agree with those who have called for a free vote, there should be a free vote once my right honourable friend has undertaken the consultation and the matrix of that consultation has been sorted out. It is not, however, an esoteric point to say that as a point of principle, His Majesty's opposition should take control of the order paper. We have, dare I say it, quite enough chaos at the moment without adding to it. It is a strange day when the Labour Party is trying to hold us to a manifesto commitment I was proud to stand on in 2019 of maintaining a moratorium. I think the key thing is that the moratorium remains in place unless or until a new regulatory system is put in place. Madam Deputy Speaker, listening to the debate today and being privy to conversations with many colleagues on this side of the House over the last few days, it's my very firm belief that that day will never dawn.
Kate Hollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would just like to remind members why we're here today. The site on Prestonview Road rocked houses, damaged communities and terrified residents. And quite right, not just on one occasion, 2 or 3 occasions, and quite rightly, the Conservative government put a ban on fracking until it could be convinced that it could be safely drilled out and cause little disruption to the communities. The Prime Minister was on Radio Lancashire, and we've got a very good host, Graham Liver, and I'd just like to congratulate him on his wedding. But Graham cornered the Prime Minister with the first 30 seconds when he said, "What has changed?" She did not have an answer. And he asked 3 or 4 times, and she still couldn't answer. She just kept saying she was very clear that people would be consulted. He asked her, what does that consultation look like? She didn't know. So members on the opposite side to accuse this side of taking the order paper is an absolute joke. Your government put in the ban. Your government says the ban would not be lifted.
Order. It's not your government. It's their government.
Their government. The government put in the ban. The government said it would lift that ban when there was safety assured. That's not happened. So you can play politics and find an excuse to vote against your conscience, but don't blame people on this side. I do not support fracking. Lancashire does not support fracking, and the government has failed to deliver any assurance that it was safe. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Lee Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, now then, I love shale gas. Hope we get loads of it. Well, we've certainly had loads of it today coming from the opposition benches. But it's not up to me, and it shouldn't be up to people in this place to decide whether or not they want fracking to go ahead in the country. And the Prime Minister she's been very consistent to say that local people will have the final say on whether or not fracking goes ahead. And we've learnt today that the local people will also get a veto, and that's the right thing. Yeah, here we have in this place. I keep coming to this place just to remind myself most of the time how out of touch a lot of MPs are in this place, because how many people in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, actually worry about what it's like in bed at night to pay their gas bill or their electric bill? Nobody in this place worries about how to pay the next bill that drops through the door. They would sooner side with the people we've seen out on Downing Street today gluing themselves to the pavement again, rather than think about the hard-working taxpayer in places like Ashford. Not once today has anybody in the opposition benches mentioned fuel poverty at all, not once. All they've banged on about is fracking in order to possibly to save their own skin at a general election. Let's be clear, nobody would support fracking in their area if it was dangerous and it didn't provide a cheaper supply of gas or there were incentives to local communities. We all know that, we're not daft. But the GMB Union, who are Labour Party's biggest funder, as I believe, they support the idea of fracking. And they say, and I quote, if it can be shown to be safe for workers and communities, fracking offers part of the solution to the energy crisis.
That's what Shadow Secretary of State said.
Now then, if the Labour Party disagrees so much with the GMB on this very important issue, then maybe they should stop accepting donations. But of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, they won't do that. Let's be honest, most people don't think twice about when the energy comes from, when they switch the kettle on in the morning. They expect electricity and gas to come to their house. They expect to be able to afford it. But my constituents are fed up now with having to face increased energy bills, especially after seeing successive governments give up on our own domestic supply of fuel over the years. And now we're in a situation where we're actually importing about 40% of our gas. This means money going to foreign treasuries, to foreign workers, when it could be done here. But like I say, if local communities in Ashfield don't want it, I would support them. If there is a community in Ashfield that did support it, I would support them. I cannot understand why we actually here even debate it, other than the mischief of the Labour Party. And he can shake his head. The Shadow Secretary of State can shake his head very well. Please come to a place like Ashfield. I know you don't visit your own constituents very often, but come to a place like Ashfield and talk to some real people. That's me done, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Olivia Blake.
Speaker. Until recently, the debate on climate change was about the science and whether or not global heating is caused by humans. But it's important to say that while the climate deniers argued over the science and the hockey stick graphs, that wasn't what gave momentum to their arguments. To be clear, there has been long, overwhelming evidence that human CO2 emissions are causing global heating. The motor of climate denial was never a rational, scientific debate, but defending the financial interests of the fossil fuel lobby. Pseudo-scientific arguments were the only form that they have of defence of their arguments, and that's the defence that they took. Now, after decades of campaigning, protesting and lobbying, the monumental efforts of climate campaigners have meant it's politically very difficult to deny the reality of the climate emergency. The overwhelming scientific evidence has been joined by the international grassroots political movement calling for climate justice. So now we're seeing a different strategy for protecting oil and gas profits. We're now being asked to choose between tackling the cost of living crisis or the climate emergency, between energy security and meeting our Paris obligations. The decision to reverse fracking is part of that new strategy, a very cynical strategy. It's an argument that says black is white, that up is down, and that pulling more fossil fuels out of the ground is somehow a form of environmentalism. But it's an argument we should completely reject, because it is nonsense. The twin ecological and climate emergency are two of the greatest existential threats we face. They demand that we restore our natural environment, keep fossil fuels in the ground, and make a transition to clean, renewable energy. Fracking takes us in exactly the opposite direction. The CCC warned that if the moratorium should be lifted, it should absolutely not be lifted without an independent review of the evidence on the climate impact. Has that been done? No, of course it's not been done. The process produces methane, which also contributes to the rising global temperatures. Research by NASA has shown that leaky gas production is one of the main drivers of methane emissions on the planet. In fact, during 1 week alone in a site in Lancashire in 2019, 4.2 tonnes of methane were released, equivalent to 142 flights. Extracting shale gas is also environmentally damaging. The geography of the UK means that it's more likely to cause earthquakes and the chemical flowback and waters being significantly at risk of contamination and further significant ecological damage. And none of this will lower our energy bills or increase our energy security. That's because gas prices aren't set by domestic supply, but the international fossil fuel markets. Even if domestic production did significantly affect international prices, the wells here would not make a difference to those prices. It's a falsehood.
Ruth Edwards.
Today's debate is less about fracking and more about the Labour Party's next social media campaign.
Exactly. Hear, hear.
For if they had wanted to show the true strength of the House's opinion on fracking, they could have tabled a normal motion today calling for the moratorium to be reintroduced. At a later stage, they could have amended a bill going through Parliament. Either of those routes, they had a reasonable chance of carrying many colleagues on this side of the House with them. But instead, they have chosen the one route that they know no member on this side of this House could possibly support: a confidence vote. Now, I don't support fracking, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I am even less keen on the idea of letting the Labour Party play at being in government for the day, because I remember what happened when they were there last time. My views on most things are no secret, and certainly not on fracking. Now, I don't buy the argument it's less environmentally friendly. Gas is gas, whether it's drilled here or overseas, and the carbon footprint of gas produced in the UK is smaller than LNG shipped in from abroad. I'm also not convinced by the argument it's unsafe, but I do think it's unsuitable in a country like the UK, where we have a high population density, especially given that even relatively small tremors can be felt by the local community. And as the British Geological Survey, which has its HQ in Rushcliffe, has said, our ability to predict such tremors has not improved since the moratorium was put in place. But my main objection to fracking is that after all the division and local anguish it causes, even the industry itself estimates it will produce very little gas. We would be better off focused on increasing the output from our North Sea industry, renewables and nuclear. I am relieved that we will have a binding vote on the process for gaining local consent. This is vital. Communities must know they have a legally enforceable route to either accept or reject fracking under their homes. And my final observation tonight, Madam Deputy Speaker, is for our own front bench. For they have enabled the opposition to force colleagues to choose between voting against our manifesto and voting to lose the whip. They should take a look at the faces of colleagues behind them, colleagues who have fracking sites in their constituencies, and they should hang their heads in shame. A Conservative government will always have my confidence, Madam Deputy Speaker, but its leadership today has severely tested my trust and the trust of many colleagues, and I would advise them not to do so again.
Anna McMorran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The fight against climate change is one that everyone, but this government, seems to be deeply worried about. In Wales, we are proud that our Welsh Labour government remains absolutely steadfast in our fracking ban, which has been in place for 7 years now and will continue. So it's even more disturbing that this Prime Minister, absent of a public mandate, has decided to tear up her own party's 2019 manifesto and any hopes of a stable future by bringing back fracking. And is it any surprise when this government is imploding? Is the Secretary of State even going to be here tomorrow? It is heartening, though, to see members on the opposite side publicly declare their support for us and against this government's option on Twitter, coming out one at a time, particularly the member for Kingswood, who is also chair of the government's Net Zero review. I think that is quite telling. This energy crisis is costing lives. Action absolutely needs to be taken to curb more suffering, but fracking is not the answer. It makes it worse. And this crisis has been created by an over-reliance on oil and gas. We can't increase it, and this government refuses to understand that. You can't tackle one crisis without tackling the other, but instead, this government has chosen to ignore the warnings, the science and pleas, making a deliberate attack, not only on the environment, but public health too. In England alone, a third of drinking water is supplied by groundwater. The British Geological Survey stated that groundwater can be contaminated by fracking. One concerning risk is from flowback water coming from fracking itself. Water that flows back contains high concentration of saline, known to cause hypertension, which can lead to pregnant women developing preeclampsia, exposing the mother to potential stroke risk, organ failure, with some babies being stillborn. Medical experts have written to the British Medical Journal stating these arguments. And in complete contrast, this government's own climate minister has claimed it's good for the environment. But that same minister publicly published his support for the ban of March this year. Fracking won't solve any of our energy problems. It won't provide the essential support the country needs right now. Drilling is irrelevant to this energy crisis, let alone being a complete abdication of duty to the environment, local communities and the climate. This latest move drives a cart and horses through any chance of credibility on global leadership on climate. They must keep that ban now.
Yeah. Paul Maynard.
Deputy Speaker, I may I start by praising the member for Rushcliffe, who has spoken so eloquently, and I endorse every word she has said about how the government has handled this matter. And I share her sense of despair, frustration and infuriation by it. But as I find myself saying so frequently at the moment, we are where we are, and we have to get on with it. I would much rather the moratorium that I stood on a manifesto commitment to implement could endure. But I have to welcome the commitment from the Secretary of State to hold a substantive vote on the process by which consent will be determined. But I echo those who have said that this should be a free vote. This is a polarising issue in my constituency. Opinion locally has always been broadly opposed to fracking, which I've always respected and taken note of. There has always also been a vocal, supportive minority, whose voices have become louder as higher energy costs have begun to be felt, even if fracking is not a solution to the problem of higher energy prices. And everyone in my constituency deserves to have their say. So my aim over recent weeks has been to ensure that the government's commitment to local consent was a meaningful one, and not one placed in the hands of companies such as Quadrilla. Any process should be independent. Indeed, a local referendum would be my preference, because all areas of the Fylde Coast should be able to participate in the discussions as they will feel the consequences. Blackpool, as a unitary authority, has no involvement in Lancashire's planning decisions, but it would bear the seismological consequences just as much as the parish of Rotherham would. And I am particularly annoyed by suggestions of financial inducements that will be proffered by the shale gas companies trying to influence the decision making. They must not form part of the decision over consent. Getting the consent system right, and that means it needs to be in a broad area, not a narrow parish within 50 metres of some pad. Getting that right would allow all my constituents, either in favour or against, to feel that they had had their voice listened to. Perhaps fundamentally, carried out under my principles, any rejection of fracking locally would be a permanent people's no, on the record. Not some temporary politicians maybe, that could be reversed by yet another U-turn or yet another new government, which is what Labour's ban, I'm afraid, offers us. Let the people of this country put on record their views about fracking in their local area, and then we as politicians should pay attention to that and act accordingly.
Grant Davis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we're here because the previous Chancellor lifted the moratorium on fracking, and his previous boss, Crispin Oddy of Oddy Hedge Fund, has put millions and millions of pounds of investment into fracking now. He's the same one who made hundreds of millions of pounds when the pound went down following Brexit, having supported Leave. He's the same one who made a lot of money out of sterling going down after the mini budget. Strange, isn't it? So we've got a situation now where the government's lifted the moratorium saying you can go ahead with fracking so long as you have safety and a local consent, so maybe that will be bribed. We don't know what will happen there. But I don't think that's sufficient, because we need to think about the environment. I was rapporteur for the Council of Europe on fracking, and what we found from satellite data was that 5% of the methane being pulled up was actually leaked through fugitive emissions, which meant that fracking is worse than coal for global warming, because methane is 80 times worse than CO2. And so we recommended 46 countries that no one went ahead with fracking. As a result, Macron, when he was first elected, he didn't have many policies. He took that policy off the table and he banned fracking, as we have, in fact, in Wales. Of course, fracking consists of sending millions of tons, millions of cubic metres of a chemically impregnated water, often hundreds of chemicals, which are carcinogenic, into the ground. Half of them come back, half of them stay underneath so they can contaminate the water table. The rest have to be processed. In the United States, they dump them in Arizona. Well, we're not the United States, and we haven't got the space. We've got the lorries running around the countryside, smashing up our environment. We've got mini earthquakes causing disturbances. We've got air quality data for the United States showing local people have all runny eyes, all sorts of problems. And as I say, that's why in Wales we've also banned it. We're focusing on tidal lagoons, wind farms, solar energy, spatial planning. There is a way forward for a sustainable green energy future. The answer is not fracking. It's environmentally unsound. We should dismiss it even if there was consent, even if there was safety concerns were alleviated, which they won't be. This is absolutely appalling. This is Tory fracking, and people should vote Labour because of this appalling decision to lift the moratorium.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fracking is an issue which ignites very strong feelings among my constituents. Since the government announced a change in direction on this issue, I've been very much looking forward to a genuinely free and fair debate in this place, where I could go on the record and outline my concerns and those of thousands of my constituents about fracking returning to the foul coast. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is most certainly not the free and fair debate that I have been hoping for. This Opposition Day debate is a very different beast altogether. This motion is not about fracking at all, but is an attempt by the Labour Party to take over the functions of government. This would overturn standing orders and the procedures of this House, which says that only the elected government of the day gets to decide on parliamentary business. It would allow Labour to legislate against the wishes of my constituents who elected a Conservative government at the last general election. We will not and cannot allow the Labour Party to seize control of the order paper. If they want to do so, they should do something they haven't done in 17 long years and win a general election. The opposition know fully well that members on this side who share their legitimate concerns regarding fracking cannot vote for their motion today. And so instead of engineering a constructive and fair debate on this issue, they have contrived to weaponise this issue. Truly shameful behaviour. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst I do have the opportunity, I would like to state once again that the vast majority of my constituents do not support fracking returning to the foul coast. The environmental and safety thresholds and protections were breached when fracking previously took place at the Preston New Road site, only a few miles outside of my constituency, and as a result, fracking stopped in 2019. Now, the war in Ukraine has woken up the West and demonstrated that we cannot rely on authoritarian foreign regimes for our energy supplies. As such, I do support the government in striving to maximise more of our domestic energy reserves, in particular North Sea oil and gas and nuclear power. And although I can see why the government has put fracking back on the table, it should only take place when it is safe and it is supported by local communities, something the government have reiterated time and time again, and which the Secretary of State has made clear once again today. That is a position I wholeheartedly support. I welcome the steps the government are taking to determine how local consent can be established, and I look forward...
No. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fracking will not solve the energy crisis. Indeed, the shale gas extracted by fracking would make no difference to gas prices and is a more expensive alternative to renewables. Further, fracking would demonstrably increase the risk of local earth tremors, as recently confirmed by the British Geological Survey. And on the wider environmental impact, Greenpeace state that not only is fracking bad for our climate, it risks causing air, water and noise pollution. It uses toxic chemicals that may not be regulated well enough. An accident could mean that these chemicals leak into water supplies or cause pollution above ground. In fact, this has happened many times in the US. So why on earth, with all of this in mind, would the government pursue a strategy that poses such risks and flies in the face of efforts to tackle climate change? Well, author and climate commentator Naomi Klein calls it the shock doctrine. The exploitation of wrenching crises to smuggle through policies that devour the public sphere and further enrich a small elite. But the bandit capitalism extends beyond just fracking into the way the government approaches our whole energy system. The pursuit of markets at all costs with little state intervention keeps leading to the same problems. Complex, poorly designed mechanisms open to gaming and profiteering that deliver poor value for money if they deliver at all, and poor environmental outcomes. And when that system fails, as it is doing now, well, it's everybody else's problem. Now, there's a new generation calling for change, a Green New Deal, a green jobs revolution that would distribute costs and rewards progressively, deepen economic democracy and kickstart an industrial strategy to rebuild and light up Britain. On this side of the House, we get that. But I'm worried that we'll miss this chance. Worse though, I'm actually frightened. Frightened that whilst there are numerous colleagues on the benches opposite who may speak out against fracking, the fact remains that they are still in the government led by an environmental and economic vandal. And although the clock may well be ticking on the Prime Minister's days in office, as Naomi Klein sadly states, when powerful ideologies are challenged by hard evidence from the real world, they rarely die off completely. A few true believers always remain to tell one another that the problem wasn't the ideology, it was the weakness of the leaders who did not apply the rules with sufficient rigour. So that is why today is so important. That's why across this House we have a moral duty to vote in favour of this motion to introduce a bin to ban hydraulic fracking for shale gas once and for all.
James Grundy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very grateful that the Secretary of State today confirmed at the dispatch box about a local veto. And I think it's very important, as other colleagues have said, that that local veto on fracking must be the paramount one. There can be no local authority overturning what has been decided by local people in a referendum or other similar independent method of decision making. Because while some colleagues today have spoken about local authorities being bastions of listening, that is not always the case with some local authorities. Unfortunately, some local authorities would be cynical enough to pass fracking applications in just a couple of opposition-held wards. And then they would claim the planning committee was the democratic representative. And so what you would find is those 3 wards, which were never going to vote for the administration, would be unable to hold the administration of the council to account. Now, I think it's very important that local authorities aren't able to hornswoggle smaller communities within the local authority this way, and that we do, by the mechanism that the Secretary of State has rightly set out, and I look forward to further detail on this, enable local residents to prevent local authorities from trampling local rights. And I am incredibly pleased that that has been given. Because I do fear, unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Wigan Council, which is in a huge dispute with local residents and is fighting local residents to the teeth over a number of incredibly unpopular planning applications in just a handful of areas within my constituency, despite the fact there have been thousands of objections, is fundamentally unwilling to listen to objectors. I am delighted that with fracking, that would not be the case, that the veto would remain at the community level. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I shall sit down. I fear I have made my point very clearly, that the local voice must be the paramount voice, and if people do not want it, they should not have it. Thank you.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government must ban fracking once and for all. It's dangerous, it's an outdated, dangerous and expensive way to produce energy, and it will not provide the clean, secure energy that our country needs, nor will it help us meet our legally binding commitment to net zero. As Friends of the Earth have pointed out, fracking risks contaminating water, it poses risk to public health and the environment, and is unlikely to reduce energy bills. The government's written statement of November 2019 said that the moratorium on fracking would be maintained until compelling new evidence is provided, which addresses the concerns around the prediction and management of induced seismicity. Likewise, the Conservative Party manifesto of 2019, on which members opposite stood and were elected, said, "We will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely." Nothing has changed, and I asked the Minister to explain what he thinks has. The recent report by the British Geological Survey found that forecasting the occurrence of large earthquakes and their expected magnitude remains a significant challenge for the geoscience community. Recently, the Secretary of State said that tolerating a higher degree of risk and disturbance appears to us to be in the national interest. So it appears that we have, as well as being reckless with the economy, the government is being reckless with the environment and the health and safety of our communities. The Committee on Climate Change has made it clear that moving away from fossil fuel consumption will both benefit households, as it will reduce exposure to volatile fossil fuel prices and reduce emissions. The government speaks of consent, but it's a matter of very real concern that there are reports that households could be handed £1,000 to consent to fracking in their area. Greenpeace has quite rightly labelled this as a cynical ploy and said that the government must be hoping that they can buy off people's concerns while they're struggling with the cost of living crisis. There currently exists a Petroleum Exploration and Development Licence, PEDL 184, covering an area of North West England, which includes my constituency of Wirral West. The licence allows a company to pursue a range of oil and gas exploration activities, subject to necessarily drilling and development consents and planning permission. No wonder my constituents are worried. They have made it abundantly clear that they do not want to see fracking. We on these benches will stand up for our constituents today and oppose fracking. The members opposite should stand by their manifesto commitment and do the same.
Justin Matters.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I start with words from the Conservative Party manifesto, page 55, because it's very clear and it's there in black and white. We placed a moratorium on fracking in England with immediate effect. Having listened to local communities, we have ruled out changes to the planning system. We will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. I read those words out because they should mean something. They should mean something to all of those opposite who were elected on those words. And if they don't mean anything to them, I'm sure they will mean something to the people who voted them in here as well, and who will be watching very closely how they vote today, because the science hasn't categorically shown that it can be done safely. But I'd also like to thank the Tory whips, actually, for making this a confidence vote in the Prime Minister, because after the week that she has had, I think that is more likely to lead to backbenchers voting with us than against us. But if they're not persuaded by that, please don't fall for the spin that we've heard that we need to do this to deal with the rising cost of energy, because it was not so long ago that the now former Chancellor said that those calling for the return of fracking misunderstand the situation. And he also said that if we lifted the fracking moratorium, it would take up to a decade to extract sufficient volumes, and it would come at a high cost for communities and our precious countryside. No amount of shale gas from hundreds of wells dotted across rural England would be enough to lower the European price anytime soon. And with the best will in the world, private companies are not going to sell the shale gas they produce to UK consumers below the market price. They are not charities, after all. Well, even a stop clock is right twice a day, and it's even the case that a discredited former Chancellor can be right about something, and he was certainly right about that. I'll just finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, say a few words about consent. The dictionary definition of consent is permission to do something or an agreement to do something. So let's be clear that that is not the same as getting a payment in lieu of consent, and it does not mean having a refined planning process to create the illusion of consent. And I'm afraid the government amendment doesn't really take us to a place where I am convinced that we will have genuine consent, and whatever is said from the dispatch box doesn't really mean anything when cabinet ministers are falling on a daily basis. Because let's be clear, consent is not the same as consultation, and this amendment talks too much about consultation rather than consent. Consultation is not as robust, it's not as definitive, and it's certainly not what people would expect. And the Business Secretary said last month that compensation and consent become two sides of the same coin. Well, I would say that they cannot possibly be two sides of the same coin. Compensation is payment in recognition of a loss. That does not in any way mean that people have agreed to suffer that loss. And if the government really do want to get consent for fracking the countryside, they should put it in their manifesto and call a general election, and we'll see whether they do get that consent.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to be called to speak in this debate today, which I believe the whips opposite have called a confidence motion in the Prime Minister. I don't know which is more exciting for her to receive her P45. Is it our side or theirs which is more exciting? The Prime Minister promised that fracking will take place only in areas with a clear public consensus behind it. But the Business Secretary ruled out local referendums and suggested that fracking companies themselves could go around door to door and ask people if they will consent. Aside from this being a truly ridiculous idea, appointing fracking operators as the arbiters of local consent would create an obvious conflict of interest and would undermine the authority of democratically elected councils. If the Business Secretary is so keen to start digging up people's areas and causing earthquakes, I look forward to the government's newer site opening in North East Somerset in the coming weeks. It may surprise some, but I agree with many of the members opposite. The member for Fylde spoke passionately last week and again today in regards to constituents who were labelled as Luddites by the Business Secretary. When I was a county councillor in Lancashire when this was actually debated over 7 years ago, and also now as the Member of Parliament for Bury South, I know the people of Radcliffe, Whitefield and Prestwich certainly aren't Luddites either, and neither are the people of Lancashire. I am against fracking, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's unpopular, it industrialises the countryside, and it contributes to climate breakdown, and importantly fails to address the energy crisis. But it's not just me who thinks that, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's the public too. One person said it would take up to a decade to extract what we need by fracking, and that it was pointless. That was the Chancellor of last week. It will create enormous disruption for little economic gain. That was the Chancellor of this week 4 months ago. The Defence Secretary opposed proposals for a fracking site in his constituency. The Tory party chair signed the Defence Secretary's letter opposing fracking. The Levelling Up Secretary said there isn't strong support for fracking, and I agree. The Secretary of State for DCMS didn't want it in her backyard, and I don't blame her. So now we know that her cabinet don't have faith in fracking or her. I look forward to many of the members opposite joining me in the lobbies today.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today we've heard from colleagues across the House making clear their opposition to fracking. It was particularly powerful hearing from MPs from the Lancashire area, which has already been affected by the seismic shocks of previous drilling, and their constituents live in fear of that happening again. Fracking is dangerous, polluting, and will not provide energy security for this country, and it is deeply unpopular. The government finally seemed to get that in 2019 with its manifesto commitment to a fracking ban, and as it's been said, everyone on that side of the House stood on that manifesto and made that promise to their constituents. Yet it's only taken a matter of days for this new administration to bring fracking back. And not through a vote or a consultation or a debate in this House. It was a decision taken just by the Secretary of State alone, who's not even turned up to hear the winding up speeches. No scrutiny, the Secretary of State, no scrutiny and no accountability. Oh, sorry, I didn't see him there. Their manifesto promised the ban on fracking would remain in place until evidence categorically proved it was safe. But the recent report from the British Geological Survey commissioned by the government has offered no new evidence whatsoever to suggest the situation has changed. As the Honourable Member for Fylde said, the geology hasn't changed. How could it? The science hasn't changed either. So what did the Secretary of State do when he couldn't find the evidence he wanted? He decided to change the rules on how big an earthquake can be considered safe. I would laugh, Madam Deputy Speaker, but there's nothing funny about this. Labour has been absolutely clear that we will always oppose fracking, whether in opposition or in government. And I'm proud that the Labour government in Wales is keeping the ban. And let us not forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this reckless decision comes in the middle of a climate emergency. At COP26, this government made a commitment on the world stage to prioritise the clean energy transition and end public support for the fossil fuel sector by the end of 2022. So how's that going? A year on, and they're not just bringing back fracking for gas, they're also issuing hundreds of new licences for fossil fuel extraction. No wonder the Prime Minister is trying to wriggle out of attending COP in Egypt next month. Let's call this what it is. It's climate vandalism. The decisions of this government are undermining our climate targets and trashing our reputation on the global stage. As the Honourable Member for West Ham said, it's taken a wrecking ball to years of patient climate diplomacy, and I'm sure the COP President would have something to say about that. The Minister for Climate Change, who's replying to the debate today, may be willing to swallow his pride and to claim that fracking is green in exchange for a seat down the far end of the cabinet table. But on this side of the House, we will be honest about fossil fuels. They are expensive, they're polluting our air and they're destroying our planet. As my right honourable friend, the member for Doncaster North, made clear earlier, the only solution to the energy crisis is a green one. Madam Deputy Speaker, removing a ban on fracking shows that we cannot trust a Tory promise, even if it was embedded in their manifesto. So how can we trust what is being said today about ensuring local consent? And let's be clear, the amendment doesn't say there will be a veto, it doesn't explain how that consent would be obtained, it's very weak on the detail, and it doesn't promise a binding vote on this House on what that consent would look like. And as my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, said, why do we even need to do this? We know that polling, the government's own polling, shows that only 17% of people support fracking. And I would imagine a large proportion of those that will say, but not in my backyard. We're quite happy for it to, I think a Lords Minister once said, in the desolate north, that's where you would frack. I'm sure that the government committing to a ban on fracking today and committing to bringing forward their own bill if they don't want Labour to put the seize control of the order paper would come as a great relief to many of the government's own MPs. Our message to colleagues on the opposite benches is this. Fracking is not necessary, it is not wanted, and it is not inevitable. Each of you there today on the opposition benches have a chance to, on the opposite benches, I should say, have a chance to, yeah, I'm forward thinking on my part. Each of you have a chance today to ensure the voices of your constituents are heard and that our planet is protected. If you support our motion today, we will secure a binding vote on a bill to ban fracking on the 29th of November, in the absence of any willingness from the government to bring that forward itself. You will all have the opportunity to ban fracking before a single drill starts up in your constituencies. You know that's what your constituents want you to do.
That's your only problem, is it?
They know that there's no excuse for doing it. So do the right thing and support the Labour motion today.
Minister Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a great pleasure to wind up this debate, which has had so many excellent contributions from across the House. And it perhaps is not for the first time that the Right Honourable Gentleman for Doncaster North, who is an extremely clever man, for whom I have a great deal of respect, has been a little bit too clever by half. And perhaps if more drafting had gone into this, then instead of seizing the order paper, we could have had a different style, an attempt to seize the order paper. Because quite clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a confidence vote, but it is an attempt by Her Majesty's. It is obviously, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a confidence vote. What it is an attempt. What it is an attempt. Let me try.
Order, come on, let's listen to the Minister. And that means be quiet up there as well. That means be quiet up there as well. Order. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. But this attempt, I won't give away. The Right Honourable Madam Deputy Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is getting overexcited. He described himself as a nerd, and of course accurately. Perhaps he should have spent more time looking at parliamentary procedure. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am proud to say that this government has led the way in reducing emissions and moving towards net zero. When the right honourable gentleman was in power, Madam Deputy Speaker, when he left power in 2010, not only was there that note that said there was no money left, fewer than 7% of our electricity, around 6.8%, came from renewables. It is this party on this side of the House which has delivered the green revolution, will continue to deliver the green revolution, and means that more than 40%, Madam Deputy Speaker, are they allowed to maintain this ridiculous stuff? It's bad enough for...
Order. Order, Mr. Davis. We are having a debate. If everybody shouts at one another, we can't have a debate. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's brought calm to the other side of the House to point out that, as I say, electricity 7% when they left power, more than 40% today. If you look at energy efficiency and you look at people struggling to heat their homes today, houses that were EPC C and above, what was the percentage? The honourable gentleman wants to tell me from a sedentary position. What percentage was it when Labour left power? I'll tell you, it was 14%. What is it today? 46%. It is this party which is moving this country towards net zero, and not only doing it at home, but leading internationally as well. I happily to give way to my own.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He's absolutely right about the green revolution, which our region in the Humber is playing such a big part of. But can I ask him to reflect on the speeches of today? Because if this was a clear vote on whether we have fracking or not, I would be in the opposite lobby with the opposition. I will stick on any binding vote to my manifesto and election commitment to oppose fracking, absolutely. So can he reflect on that? And can I urge him to continue with the vein he was going down, which is how much we should be investing in green energy?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and of course we are investing. We have, near both of our constituencies, seen the transformation. If I may just at least answer this without being permanently harassed by the right honourable gentleman who should learn to sit. I can tell to my right honourable friend, he has seen the transformation of the whole economics of offshore wind. He has seen this government put in place the CFDs, which are now being copied all around the way. Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel if I don't give way to the right honourable gentleman, he may suffer some serious medical emergency.
Now, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the guidance of the House, the Minister said something very important from the dispatch box. He said this is not a confidence motion. And I think his members will want to know that. If he confirms that, then members opposite can vote for our motion in the safe knowledge that they can be confident in the current Prime Minister. So can you just confirm that?
Well, the right honourable gentleman was so excited in order to repeat something which I'd already said multiple times. Colleagues on this side of the House are perfectly clear. They are not going to surrender, and they're not going to allow the Labour Party to be a government for a day by seizing control of the order paper. So, we will continue.
Point of order. Better be a point of order.
I think it is, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's really important that members know what they are voting on.
Members know what they're voting on. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will continue to lead the world and drive forward offshore and onshore wind, solar energy, and we will do SMRs and gigawatt-level nuclear, as well as support for AMRs, and we will come forward. Madam Deputy Speaker, with proposals to support hydrogen and CCUS. We are looking all across the piece to drive the green revolution. But as part of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as part of that work, we also need to ensure the gas and oil that we rely on at the moment as we manage and drive down our usage on the path to net zero. To the honourable lady.
way. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I really do need to press him on this issue of a confidence vote, because many of us have been told today by our whips that if we vote or abstain from voting against this motion, we will lose the whip. So could he please confirm whether that is the case or not?
I thank the honourable...
We have to hear the answer. Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for that question, and that is a matter for party managers, and I'm not a party manager. Madam Deputy Speaker, community support is so important, and that is why we have, as we've heard from the Secretary of State today, pledged to colleagues to ensure that that community support, there will be that community veto that we've heard so much about from colleagues from East Sussex, North Dorset, Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, South West Bedfordshire, Taunton Deane, Winchester, East Yorkshire, my neighbour, Gloucester, Bolsover, Scarborough and Whitby, up the coast from me, South Thanet, Worcester, Gloucester, Rother Valley, North Dorset, Ashfield, Rushcliffe, Blackpool South and Lee. And it's interesting to see the Liberal Democrat on his feet, who in his speech, Madam Deputy Speaker, suggested not a drop more of gas or oil should come out of the ground, forgetting that 75% of our energy needs today come from fossil fuels. It is this government which is leading the green transformation to take us away from it. It is this government which is driving forward net zero, not only here, but equally importantly, all around the world. And it is, of course, my colleague who has been president of COP26, who has moved the world from having just 30% of global GDP covered by net zero pledges, 30% in 2019, to more than 90% today. It is that transformation of the global position on the pathway to net zero that has been a critical path, as well as leading the development of net zero at home. That is why we will continue to make sure that we develop, and that's why we are issuing licences or issuing blocks in the North Sea, so that we can produce domestic oil and gas as we manage that pathway down. We will manage it down.
The question is that the question be now put. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Lillian Greenwood and Jessica Morden. Tell us for the noes, Amanda Soloway and Mark Jenkinson. will the Sergeant please investigate the delay in the no lobby? Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 230. The noes to the left, 326.
Thank you. Order! Order! The ayes to the right, 230. The noes to the left, 326. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Point of order, Tangham Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to, on a point of order, there are rumours, very strong rumours, that the Government Chief Whip has apparently resigned. I wonder if it's possible to get some clarity. More than rumours, well, if you want to say no, Madam Deputy Speaker, I seek your guidance on whether or not this can be confirmed, given that this is actually a matter of parliamentary discipline.
Yes, it is.
The Honourable Lady raises a point as to whether a member of the government has resigned. I have not been given any such information. I know no more than that, and it's not a point of order for the Chair. Point of order, Mr Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if you could clarify that during the debate we just had, the Minister from the dispatch box closing the debate informed his colleagues that this was not a vote of confidence. Yet we saw earlier, in writing from the Government Deputy Chief Whip, that it was. Could it be possible that members opposite voted in the division just now without any clarity as to what it was they were actually voting for?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point, which is, of course, not a point of order for the Chair. My concern is that what it says in the order paper is correct and accurate, and it is. And I thank the honourable gentleman for the point he raises, but it's not one on which I can judge. Ministers are responsible for their own words. Is it a point of order? Point of order, Mr. Bryant.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would urge you to launch an investigation into the scenes outside the entrance to the no lobby earlier. As you know, members are expected to be able to vote without fear or favour.
Yes.
And the behaviour code, which is agreed by the whole of the House, says that there shall never be bullying or harassment of members. I saw members being physically manhandled into another lobby and being bullied.
while crying.
If we want to stand up against bullying in this House of our staff, we have to stop bullying in this chamber as well, don't we?
Order, order. We're talking about behaviour. We will have a little bit of good behaviour for a moment on both sides of the House. The honourable gentleman raises an important matter about behaviour, and he knows better than anyone else that we have an extremely good system for investigating allegations of bullying, intimidation or bad behaviour. And if the honourable gentleman cares to bring evidence and facts to me, I will make sure that the matter is properly investigated. Of course, we must have decorous behaviour at all times. And so we will now proceed quietly and politely. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is the main motion as amended. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you. That concludes that item of business, and we now come to motion 3 relating to business of the House, supplementary estimates and supply and appropriation adjustments bill. Minister to move. The question is as on the order paper. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 4 on sanctions. Minister to move. The question is as on the order